Ever wondered what happens to Rick's cold exterior when the universe stops watching? Behind all those burps and cynical one-liners lies a character far more complex than he'd ever admit. This video explores the emotional core of Rick Sanchez that only emerges in fleeting moments throughout the series. As you drift off to sleep tonight, we're going to journey through Rick's reluctant evolution from a man who claimed attachments were for fools to someone who would sacrifice universes for his grandson. The subtle transformation happens so gradually, you might have missed it. But tonight we're slowing down to appreciate the masterful character development hidden beneath the trippy adventures. What if everything we thought we knew about Rick Sanchez was just an elaborate shield against feeling too much? Behind that lab coat and perpetual drool lies a man who's not just running from interdimensional authorities but from something far more terrifying: his own emotions. Rick's cynicism isn't just a personality trait, it's a carefully constructed fortress. When he casually tells Morty, "Nothing matters, Morty," you gotta let that sink in. He's not just sharing his nihilistic philosophy, he's reinforcing the walls of his emotional bunker. This dismissal of meaning serves a very specific purpose in Rick's psychological architecture. By convincing himself that connections and relationships are pointless in an infinite multiverse, he creates the perfect excuse to avoid the vulnerability that comes with caring. But Rick's fortress has cracks, and they're especially visible in the early seasons if you know where to look. His scientific genius itself functions as another layer of protection. By focusing on the mechanical and mathematical certainties of the universe, he can avoid the messy uncertainties of human connection. We see this when he buries himself in complex projects precisely when emotional tensions in the Smith household reach their peak. His workshop becomes a sanctuary not just for invention, but for avoidance. The alcohol that's perpetually within Rick's reach isn't just a character quirk or comedic device. His flask appears most frequently during moments of potential emotional breakthrough, functioning as both an escape route and a coping mechanism. In episodes where Rick faces situations that might force him to confront his feelings, his drinking intensifies. It's no coincidence that some of his heaviest drinking episodes align perfectly with stories that threaten to expose his deeper attachments to the Smith family. What makes Rick such a fascinating character is the constant tension between what he says and what he does. While his words preach detachment and scientific objectivity, his actions repeatedly betray a man who's capable of profound connection. We see this contradiction most clearly in crisis moments. When Morty faces genuine danger, Rick's usually dismissive demeanor transforms. The animation team deserves particular credit here for the subtle work they do with Rick's facial expressions in these moments. Pay close attention to Rick's eyes during scenes where Morty's safety is threatened. The typical half-lidded, smug expression gives way to something more alert, more present. His eyebrows shift from their usual sardonic position to something closer to concern, even if just for a split second before he catches himself. These minute animation details reveal emotional leakage, feelings that escape before Rick can contain them behind his cynical facade. These animation subtleties become even more meaningful when contrasted with Rick's verbal output. In moments of accidental emotional transparency, Rick typically doubles down on his cynical messaging, almost as if he's trying to convince himself as much as others. This creates a fascinating dissonance between what we hear and what we see. His voice says one thing while his body language reveals something entirely different. The contrast between Rick's exterior and interior lives becomes particularly evident in episodes where he's forced to make sacrifices. Despite his frequent claims that self-preservation is the only rational choice in a meaningless universe, Rick repeatedly puts himself in harm's way for his family, especially Morty. When backed into these corners, Rick typically provides elaborate scientific justifications for his protective actions, never admitting the simpler emotional motivations that might actually be driving him. His scientific rationales serve as a shield against vulnerability, allowing him to maintain his detached persona even while performing acts of care. When he saves Morty from danger, it's never because he loves his grandson, at least not according to Rick. Instead, it's explained away as statistical probability, interdimensional chess moves, or simply practical necessity. These moments reveal how Rick's intellectual brilliance isn't just his superpower, it's also his emotional crutch. The compilation of episodes we're exploring tonight particularly highlights the evolution of these cracks in Rick's defensive armor. By arranging these adventures in a specific sequence, patterns emerge that might not be obvious when watching the show in broadcast order. We can track the gradual weakening of Rick's nihilistic shield as his connections to the Smith family, connections he consistently denies the importance of, become increasingly difficult for him to ignore. Early episodes establish Rick's emotional walls at their strongest, while later entries in our compilation reveal moments where those defenses begin to falter. These transitions aren't dramatic character reversals. That wouldn't be true to Rick. Instead, they're subtle shifts, momentary lapses that become slightly more frequent and slightly more pronounced as his time with the family extends. What makes these moments so powerful is the context provided by the show's creators. Rick's nihilism isn't simply a philosophical position he's arrived at through cold analysis. It's a response to profound personal loss. His cynical exterior functions as a defense mechanism against the pain of past attachments gone wrong. Having experienced the agony of losing those he cared about, Rick has concluded that the safest approach to life is to care about nothing and no one. But as we see throughout this compilation, Rick's defense mechanisms are fighting a losing battle against his innate capacity for connection. Despite his best efforts to remain detached, his protective instincts toward Morty continue to surface. These moments of unintentional caring create the show's most compelling tension, the struggle between Rick's stated philosophy and his actual behavior. Rick's relationship with alcohol becomes particularly telling in this context. His drinking isn't just casual substance use, it's a coping mechanism that increases precisely when his emotional walls are most threatened. In episodes where Rick comes closest to meaningful connection, his flask appears more frequently, almost as if he's trying to numb the vulnerability he feels creeping in. The animation details in these moments tell their own story. During instances of emotional breakthrough, Rick's typical fluid movements become slightly more rigid, his posture more defensive. These subtle physical clues reveal a man actively fighting against his own emotional responses, using his body as another line of defense against vulnerability. As we progress through these episodes, pay particular attention to the growing gap between what Rick says and what Rick does. His verbal claims about detachment and nihilism remain consistent, but his actions gradually reveal a man who's capable of profound attachment. This dissonance creates the dramatic tension that makes Rick such a compelling character. We're watching someone whose worldview is being challenged not by external forces, but by his own capacity for connection. Actions speak louder than belches in the case of Rick Sanchez. Beneath all that nihilistic armor lies a contradiction that first surfaced during a Rickle in time, a moment so subtle yet significant that it fundamentally altered their relationship. Despite claiming that emotional attachments are meaningless in an infinite multiverse, Rick's body language tells a completely different story when Morty's life hangs in the balance. The A Rickle in Time episode marks the first major sacrifice Rick makes for his grandson. When faced with a split-second decision between saving himself or Morty, Rick chooses Morty without hesitation. This isn't just another adventure gone wrong. It's the first undeniable proof that Rick values Morty beyond his utility as a sidekick. The scene plays out with Rick literally putting himself in harm's way, risking his own safety to protect his grandson from the consequences of a time-fractured reality. What makes this moment particularly revealing is how it contrasts with the early dynamic between them. In those initial adventures, Morty served primarily as a human shield, a convenient camouflage for Rick's brainwaves, and an extra pair of hands when science demanded it. Rick made no pretense about Morty's disposability, frequently reminding him that, in an infinite multiverse, there were infinite Mortys to replace him if necessary. But something shifts during A Rickle in Time. The episode captures Rick in a moment of pure instinct, where there's no time to calculate the scientific advantages of his decision. His body moves before his mind can rationalize, and that impulsive protection reveals something Rick would never willingly admit. He cares about this specific Morty. Watch carefully during moments of genuine danger, and you'll notice Rick's entire demeanor transforms. His typically slouched posture straightens, his voice loses its sarcastic edge, and his movements become more deliberate and focused. In Ricklantis Mix-Up, his frustration over the dangers they face isn't just annoyance at inconvenience. It's genuine concern that he struggles to articulate properly. These behavioral shifts happen so quickly they're easy to miss, but they're consistent throughout the series whenever Morty faces real harm. The animation team cleverly emphasizes these moments with subtle techniques. Close-up shots linger on Rick's face just long enough to catch the flash of concern before it's buried under his usual cynicism. The pacing slows during these scenes, creating a more intimate atmosphere that gives weight to Rick's protective instincts. Even the coloring shifts slightly, using softer tones that contrast with the usual vibrant palette of their cosmic adventures. What's fascinating is how quickly Rick retreats to scientific justification after these emotional moments. He'll rescue Morty from certain death, then immediately claim it was just to keep you safe from the consequences of my experiments. This scientific framing allows Rick to maintain his emotional distance while still acting on his genuine concern. He's protecting his ego as carefully as he protects his grandson. The music underscores these pivotal moments beautifully. The soundtrack shifts to softer, more contemplative tones during scenes where Rick shows genuine concern, creating an audio cue that something significant is happening beneath the surface. These musical shifts aren't just atmospheric, they're guiding us to pay attention to the emotional undercurrents that Rick himself refuses to acknowledge. Even more telling is Rick's reluctance to acknowledge his growing attachment. After moments of emotional transparency, he doubles down on dismissive comments and sarcasm. It's as if he's trying to convince himself as much as Morty that he doesn't care. Yet, with each adventure, his protective behaviors become more pronounced, creating an increasingly obvious contradiction between his stated philosophy and his actions. By the time we reach the wedding squanchers, Rick can no longer maintain the pretense. This episode represents the turning point where Rick's emotional investment in Morty and the entire Smith family becomes impossible to deny. The stakes are raised to galactic proportions, and Rick makes a decision that completely contradicts his self-proclaimed selfish nature. He surrenders himself to the Galactic Federation, accepting imprisonment to protect his family. For a man who consistently preaches that nothing matters in an infinite universe, this sacrifice reveals that some things, some people, matter profoundly to him. What makes these moments so compelling is that they're never explicitly stated. There's no dramatic monologue where Rick confesses his affection. Instead, we witness it through a series of small decisions, subtle shifts in body language, and reluctant sacrifices. The relationship evolves through actions rather than words, creating a more authentic emotional journey. Looking at these episodes as a sequence rather than isolated adventures reveals a consistent pattern. Rick's protective instincts toward Morty appear first as anomalies, brief moments that contradict his stated worldview. But as the series progresses, these moments become more frequent and more significant until they can no longer be dismissed as aberrations. They're revealing the truth that Rick has been hiding from himself, that despite all his knowledge of the infinite universe, he's formed a genuine bond with this particular Morty in this particular reality. It's worth noting that Rick's growing attachment to Morty happens despite his resistance, not because of any conscious decision. This involuntary connection makes it all the more authentic. Rick isn't choosing to care about Morty. He simply finds himself unable to maintain his emotional distance, especially when Morty's safety is threatened. For a character who prides himself on his control over every situation, this involuntary emotional response represents a profound vulnerability. While Rick's vulnerability isn't just exposed through his actions, it's amplified by what you hear. The soundtrack in Rick and Morty performs a crucial role that dialogue alone never could. When Rick's emotional walls begin to crack, the music transforms from frantic sci-fi beats to hauntingly beautiful melodies, revealing his true feelings without a single word being spoken. This musical transformation isn't accidental. Composer Ryan Elder carefully crafts each sonic landscape to guide viewers through Rick's emotional journey. The soundtrack doesn't just accompany the story, it tells critical parts of it, especially during those rare moments when Rick's carefully maintained facade begins to crumble. Elder's approach involves creating specific musical motifs that resonate with Rick's emotional states, effectively directing our feelings during these pivotal scenes. Think about how the music shifts when Rick faces genuine emotional conflict. The typical chaotic, synthesizer-heavy sounds that accompany interdimensional adventures suddenly give way to something entirely different. Melancholic piano notes, gentle string arrangements, or haunting vocal tracks that create space for emotional resonance. This stark contrast isn't simply aesthetic. It's deliberately designed to highlight the significance of these vulnerable moments. The show's creators understand that music speaks a language that bypasses our rational defenses, much like Rick's emotional breakthroughs bypass his own intellectual barriers. During typical adventure sequences, the soundtrack mirrors Rick's controlled manic energy with upbeat tempos and electronic flourishes. But when genuine emotion breaks through, the music slows down, simplifies, and often employs classical instruments that evoke a sense of timelessness and vulnerability. For the Damaged Coda stands as perhaps the most powerful example of this technique. This haunting piano piece appears during some of Rick's most vulnerable scenes, creating a profound emotional resonance that enhances the impact of these narrative moments. The song has become so intimately connected with Rick's emotional state that its opening notes immediately signal to viewers that something significant is happening beneath his cynical exterior. What makes these musical choices even more effective is how they work in tandem with the show's audio mixing. During critical character moments, the audio engineers deliberately emphasize dialogue, ensuring that the emotional weight of Rick's interactions isn't lost amidst the background music. This careful balancing act allows viewers to fully appreciate both the verbal and nonverbal elements of these emotionally charged scenes. The music becomes a supporting character rather than competing with the dialogue, creating a more immersive emotional experience. The background ambient sounds play an equally important role in establishing the emotional tone. These subtle audio elements create a sleep-friendly atmosphere while maintaining the emotional impact necessary for storytelling. The gentle hum of Rick's spaceship, the ambient noises of alien environments, or the quiet mechanical sounds of Rick's garage workshop all contribute to a sonic landscape that soothes without sacrificing narrative depth. These background elements create a consistent audio bed that makes the soundtrack ideal for nighttime viewing. What's particularly fascinating is how the pacing of the music helps transition between high-energy adventure sequences and contemplative emotional moments. The soundtrack doesn't abruptly jump between these extremes, but instead guides viewers through gradual transitions that mirror the emotional ebbs and flows of the narrative. When Rick transitions from cosmic adventurer to vulnerable human, the music facilitates this shift with changes in tempo, instrumentation, and emotional coloring. These musical transitions serve as emotional waypoints throughout Rick's character journey. As viewers, we might not consciously register every note or chord change, but our emotional response to Rick's character is profoundly influenced by these sonic cues. When Rick makes significant emotional breakthroughs, the music often precedes his actions, preparing us subconsciously for the vulnerability we're about to witness. In episodes where Rick faces genuine emotional crisis, the music often begins its shift before he himself acknowledges his feelings. This creates a subtle dramatic irony where viewers sense Rick's emotional state through the music before he verbally expresses it, or more typically, before he attempts to deny it. The soundtrack essentially reveals Rick's emotional truth, while his words and actions might still be caught in denial. The trippy visual elements of Rick and Morty find their perfect complement in this carefully orchestrated soundtrack. The cosmic vistas, interdimensional travel sequences, and bizarre alien landscapes are enhanced by music that emphasizes their otherworldly quality while maintaining emotional grounding. For sleep viewers, this combination creates a perfect balance, visually engaging enough to hold attention, but orally soothing enough to facilitate relaxation. Rick's emotional journey becomes more accessible through this musical storytelling. Moments where he struggles with genuine connection, faces loss, or makes sacrifices for those he cares about are amplified by musical choices that invite viewers to feel what Rick himself might be unable to express. The soundtrack becomes a window into Rick's emotional world, revealing depths that his cynical exterior tries to conceal. For viewers drifting towards sleep, this musical emotional guidance creates a uniquely comforting experience. The soundtrack serves as a gentle hand leading us through Rick's journey, highlighting moments of emotional significance without demanding our full conscious attention. We can follow Rick's emotional evolution through the changing musical landscape even as our eyes grow heavy. In episodes showcasing Rick's reluctant care for Morty, the musical shifts become particularly pronounced. Adventures that begin with frenetic, adventurous scores gradually transform into contemplative soundscapes as Rick's protective instincts emerge. These musical progressions tell the emotional story of their relationship with a clarity that dialogue alone could never achieve. The soundtrack might reveal Rick's emotions, but it's his actions that speak the loudest truth, especially when they contradict his own carefully constructed philosophy. For all his talk about the meaninglessness of existence, Rick Sanchez has made some surprisingly consequential choices that betray his nihilistic worldview. These moments, scattered across the series, form stepping stones in a reluctant character evolution that Rick himself would be loath to acknowledge. A Rickle in Time presents one of these defining moments, where Rick faces a critical choice between his own scientific interests and his grandson's life. What's fascinating is how this moment crystallizes the internal conflict at Rick's core. Does he prioritize his intellectual pursuits or the family connections he claims not to value? When faced with this dilemma, Rick makes a choice that contradicts his stated worldview. He sacrifices his own scientific ambitions to ensure Morty's safety, revealing that beneath his cynical exterior lies a man capable of putting someone else's needs before his own. This moment isn't just about saving Morty. It's about Rick unwittingly showing us his true priorities when the pressure is highest. These sacrifices aren't isolated incidents, but represent pivotal shifts in Rick's character journey. Each time he chooses Morty or family over his own self-interest, he's tacitly admitting that his nihilistic philosophy has exceptions he can't quite explain away with his usual scientific rationalizations. These moments accumulate like evidence in a case against Rick's own stated beliefs about what matters in the universe. Autoerotic assimilation delivers another window into Rick's emotional complexity, particularly in its haunting final scene. After an adventure filled with his typical bravado, we witness something rare. Rick in a moment of raw vulnerability. His interactions with Bird Person throughout this episode reveal layers to Rick that he typically keeps buried beneath his cynical exterior. These quiet exchanges suggest something profound, that Rick is capable of genuine friendship and connection, despite his attempts to convince himself and everyone around him that such connections are meaningless in an infinite universe. What makes this episode particularly revealing is how it juxtaposes Rick's public persona with his private emotional reality. The contrast between his confident swagger and his moment of genuine despair suggests that Rick's emotional landscape is far more complex than he lets on. These private moments, when Rick believes no one is watching, offer the most honest glimpses into who he really is beneath all the defensive posturing. The relationship between Rick and Bird Person serves as another crucial lens through which we can understand Rick's capacity for emotional connection. Their history together hints at a time when Rick might have been more open to genuine relationships, before whatever experiences hardened him into the cynical figure we know. Bird Person knows Rick in ways the Smith family doesn't. He's witnessed a version of Rick that existed before the walls went up, making their interactions particularly revealing. Rick's reactions to the loss of close friends like Bird Person illuminate how deeply these connections actually affect him, despite his protest to the contrary. These losses have clearly shaped Rick's worldview and contribute to his reluctance to form new attachments. His grief manifests not as typical sadness, but as a reinforcement of his nihilistic shield, a way of saying, "See, this is why connections are pointless." Yet the very intensity of his reaction betrays how much these relationships actually meant to him. Rick doesn't grieve like someone who truly believes nothing matters. He grieves like someone trying desperately to convince himself that's true. As the series progresses, subtle but significant changes emerge in how Rick interacts with the Smith family. Early on, he treats them primarily as tools for his adventures or inconveniences to be managed. But over time, his behavior shifts in ways that suggest growing attachment. He begins to consider their needs, occasionally prioritize their happiness, and even make sacrifices for their well-being that can't be explained away by pure self-interest. These changes aren't dramatic character reversals, but small adjustments that accumulate across episodes, creating a portrait of a man slowly, reluctantly, allowing himself to care. What makes Rick's character development so compelling is precisely how much he resists it. Unlike typical character arcs where growth is embraced, Rick fights against his own emotional evolution at every turn. He'll make a selfless choice and then immediately undercut it with cynical commentary. He'll show genuine concern for a family member and then cover it with a crude joke. This resistance creates a fascinating tension. We're watching a character being dragged kicking and screaming toward his own redemption. The creators have explicitly noted that Rick's journey isn't just about showcasing his intelligence, but exploring his emotional growth through the relationships he forms, particularly with Morty. This insight confirms that the subtle shifts we observe in Rick's behavior aren't accidental, but core to his character development. The writers are deliberately charting a course that challenges Rick's nihilistic foundations by putting him in situations where his actions contradict his stated philosophy. These moments of reluctant growth aren't neatly packaged or cleanly resolved. They're messy, inconsistent, and often followed by backsliding, just like real human emotional development. Rick might make a breakthrough in one episode only to double down on his cynicism in the next. But the overall trajectory remains clear. The man who claimed nothing matters keeps making choices that suggest some things matter very much indeed. What emerges across these episodes is a portrait of a character caught between his intellectual beliefs and his emotional reality. Rick intellectually subscribes to a nihilistic worldview where connections are meaningless in an infinite multiverse. But emotionally, he can't fully commit to this philosophy. His actions repeatedly betray that some things, some people, do matter to him, creating an internal conflict he can neither resolve nor fully acknowledge. Behind Rick's internal struggle lies an unexpected catalyst that's been changing him all along: Morty Smith. The same nervous kid who once followed Rick's every command has gradually evolved into something Rick never anticipated: a moral compass that occasionally points the scientist in directions his brilliant mind would never choose on its own. When we first met Morty, he was little more than a frightened sidekick overwhelmed by Rick's adventures. His primary function seemed to be following instructions and occasionally screaming when things went sideways. But somewhere along this cosmic journey, something remarkable happened. The trembling, uncertain teenager began developing a backbone. Not just any backbone, but one firmly rooted in empathy and moral clarity. This transformation becomes particularly evident in A Rickle in Time, where Morty doesn't simply go along with Rick's plan. He directly confronts him about the consequences of their actions. It's a pivotal moment that showcases Morty's growing confidence to challenge the self-proclaimed smartest man in the universe. Rather than accepting Rick's dismissive attitude toward potential collateral damage, Morty demands accountability, forcing his grandfather to reconsider the ethical implications of their interdimensional tampering. What makes Morty's evolution so fascinating is that it happens without him losing his fundamental compassion. While Rick approaches the universe with calculated cynicism, Morty consistently leads with his heart. We see this whenever they encounter beings in distress during their adventures. Rick typically views them as insignificant obstacles or potential test subjects, while Morty advocates for their welfare, trying to save innocent lives despite Rick's protests that such efforts are pointless in an infinite universe. This empathetic perspective creates a consistent friction between the two characters that gradually reshapes Rick's worldview. It's not that Morty suddenly becomes smarter than Rick in a conventional sense. It's that his emotional intelligence provides insights that Rick's brilliant but damaged mind often overlooks. Morty's unwavering concern for others serves as a counterweight to Rick's nihilistic tendencies, introducing an element Rick cannot easily dismiss with science or logic. The Morty effect becomes increasingly apparent in episodes where Rick acknowledges Morty's insights, even if reluctantly. These moments usually begin with Rick dismissing Morty's concerns outright, followed by a grudging recognition that maybe, just maybe, the kid has a point. This pattern reveals the complexity of their relationship as Morty transitions from mere sidekick to something closer to a moral anchor for Rick. In the Ricklantis mix-up, we witness Morty's remarkable growth as he navigates the dangerous political landscape of the Citadel. Rather than cowering in the face of corruption and danger, This version of Morty challenges the established order, demonstrating how far the character has come from his timid beginnings. This episode showcases not just Morty's personal development, but his potential to influence systems much larger than himself, a microcosm of his ongoing influence on Rick's worldview. Perhaps most intriguing is how Morty's impact extends beyond their adventures to affect Rick's fundamental perspective on existence. When Morty encourages Rick to consider the emotional ramifications of their actions, he's not just asking Rick to be nicer. He's challenging the core nihilistic philosophy that has defined Rick's approach to life. These confrontations prompt moments of reflection where Rick must reconsider whether his "nothing matters" mantra is truly serving him or merely insulating him from meaningful connection. The dynamic between them evolves in fascinating ways throughout the series. As Morty becomes more assertive and confident in his moral positions, Rick displays unexpected moments of vulnerability. This shift isn't a simple role reversal, but rather a complex dance where both characters influence each other. Morty occasionally adopts some of Rick's pragmatism and scientific thinking, while Rick, often unconsciously, begins incorporating elements of Morty's moral framework into his decision-making. The Old Man and the Seat provides another window into this transformation, as Morty confronts Rick about his emotional detachment. Rather than simply accepting Rick's walls as impenetrable, Morty persistently challenges his grandfather to acknowledge his feelings, serving as a catalyst for Rick's reluctant self-reflection. These confrontations, uncomfortable as they may be for Rick, create spaces for growth that would never exist if Rick traveled alone or with a more compliant companion. What's particularly remarkable about Morty's influence is that it occurs despite Rick's constant belittlement. Rick regularly reminds Morty of his intellectual limitations and dismisses his concerns as naive or irrelevant. Yet despite this discouragement, Morty continues to assert his moral perspective, creating a persistent pressure that gradually reshapes Rick's approach to the universe. The yellow-shirted teenager accomplishes what countless adversaries have failed to do. He gets under Rick's skin in ways that matter. The full impact of this relationship becomes clear when we observe Rick's gradual acceptance of Morty's importance in his life. Episodes where Rick acknowledges Morty's value reveal how profoundly the younger Smith has altered Rick's nihilistic philosophy. While Rick may never fully abandon his scientific skepticism, Morty's presence introduces an undeniable emotional component to his calculations, a variable that Rick cannot eliminate no matter how hard he tries. This transformation isn't always linear or consistent. Rick frequently relapses into his cynical patterns, especially when feeling vulnerable. But the overall trajectory shows a man slowly, reluctantly expanding his worldview to include considerations that would have seemed absurdly sentimental to him in earlier adventures. Morty becomes not just a companion, but a living challenge to Rick's carefully constructed nihilism, a persistent reminder that connections might matter after all, even in an infinite multiverse. The scientific genius and his morally centered grandson create a partnership that transcends their initial dynamic. What began as Rick merely using Morty as a human shield against detection has evolved into something neither could have predicted. A relationship where the supposedly dumbest person in the room somehow manages to influence the decisions of the self-proclaimed smartest man in the universe. It's a transformation that speaks to the power of persistent empathy to penetrate even the most formidable emotional defenses. In a multiverse where nothing matters because everything exists infinitely, Rick Sanchez's actions tell a completely different story than his nihilistic words. While he constantly reminds Morty that nothing matters in the grand scheme of the multiverse, his adventures increasingly revolve around protecting specific people, not random versions, but the exact individuals he's grown attached to. This contradiction forms the most fascinating paradox in the series. A man who understands the cosmic insignificance of existence better than anyone else, yet fights desperately to preserve connections he claims are meaningless. The concept of infinite realities in Rick and Morty creates the perfect backdrop for exploring existential questions. Every adventure through a portal serves as both evidence for Rick's nihilism and a challenge to it. If everything exists infinitely, then why does Rick keep returning to this specific version of his family? The show brilliantly uses this tension to explore something deeper than mere sci-fi adventure. It examines how we create meaning in a universe that offers none inherently. Episodes like Rick Potion Number 9 demonstrate this existential dilemma perfectly. After Rick and Morty catastrophically mutate their original world's population, they simply hop to a reality where alternate versions of themselves solved the problem but died immediately after. As they bury their own corpses and assume their lives, the scene captures the horror of cosmic replaceability. Yet, instead of embracing the freedom this should provide, Rick shows unusual restraint in how often he employs this solution, suggesting an unspoken recognition that these specific versions of his family hold unique importance to him. The show's animation style shifts dramatically during these moments of existential crisis. When Rick and Morty travel between dimensions, the vibrant, chaotic visuals don't just serve as trippy eye candy, they function as visual metaphors for the disorienting nature of existential questioning. The swirling portals, impossible geometries, and dimension-hopping sequences visually represent the vertigo of confronting meaninglessness. Yet the animation always returns to the familiar, suggesting that even amid infinite chaos, we naturally seek familiar anchors. What makes these adventures so compelling is how they force Rick to confront his contradictions. In a universe where he could simply find another version of anyone he loses, Rick's scientific understanding of multiversal reality should make him completely detached. Instead, we witness a man increasingly driven by emotional connections he can't rationally justify within his own philosophical framework. The show never resolves this tension. It lets it simmer as the central mystery of Rick's character. The Council of Rick's episodes brilliantly illustrate this contradiction. When confronted with infinite versions of himself, some kinder, some crueler, some more successful, Rick C-137 still maintains his individuality is somehow special. He rejects the conformity of other Ricks while simultaneously asserting there's something unique about his particular journey through the multiverse. This stance fundamentally contradicts his stated belief that nothing distinguishes one reality from another in any meaningful way. This existential tension reaches its peak during adventures where Rick confronts the consequences of his choices across multiple timelines. While he frequently dismisses the importance of any single reality, his actions reveal an increasing preoccupation with maintaining stability in his primary timeline. He'll sacrifice alternate realities to preserve his own, revealing that despite his claims, some versions of existence do matter more to him than others, a direct contradiction of true nihilism. The trippy visuals that characterize Rick's interdimensional travel serve a deeper purpose beyond mere psychedelic aesthetics. The chaotic and vibrant animation creates a stunning contrast with the darker existential themes. As Rick and Morty float through impossible geometries and kaleidoscopic dimensions, these sequences visually represent the disorienting nature of confronting life's fundamental questions. The beauty amid chaos speaks to the show's underlying message. Even in a meaningless universe, we can find profound experiences worth preserving. Rick's statement, "I don't know him, you're my grandpa," perfectly captures his struggle with identity and connection. This moment reveals the fundamental paradox of Rick's character. While his scientific understanding tells him that all versions of his family are interchangeable, his emotional reality is that he's formed specific bonds that matter deeply to him. The existential weight of knowing replacements exist while still feeling attached to specific individuals creates the central tension that drives Rick's character development. Rick's adventures across the multiverse constantly force him to confront questions about meaning and purpose. When faced with infinite possibilities, the choices Rick makes reveal what truly matters to him. Despite all realities being equally real scientifically, he consistently returns to the same version of his family. This behavior suggests that beneath his nihilistic exterior, Rick is actively searching for something that gives his existence meaning, a quest that directly contradicts his stated philosophy. Episodes featuring the Citadel of Ricks are particularly revealing. While other Ricks have essentially embraced the meaninglessness of individuality by forming a collective, our Rick rejects this approach vehemently. His resistance to conforming with other versions of himself demonstrates an unspoken belief that his specific path through the multiverse has unique value, a fundamentally anti-nihilistic stance that contradicts his verbal assertions that nothing matters. The emotional impact of Rick's interdimensional adventures is most powerful when they force him to confront the consequences of his actions across multiple realities. When Rick sees the impact of abandoning Beth in countless dimensions, or witnesses the destruction he's caused across the multiverse, these moments trigger genuine emotional responses that someone truly committed to nihilism wouldn't experience. These reactions reveal that despite understanding the cosmic insignificance of existence better than anyone, Rick cannot fully embrace the meaninglessness he preaches. What these existential adventures ultimately reveal is that Rick's scientific understanding of the universe increasingly conflicts with his emotional development. As his connections to Morty and the Smith family deepen, the contradiction in his worldview becomes more pronounced. He knows intellectually that in an infinite multiverse, no single relationship should matter, yet he consistently risks everything to protect specific versions of his family members. This tension between intellectual nihilism and emotional attachment becomes the driving force behind the series' most profound moments. Behind Rick's nihilistic shield, and between those multiverse-threatening adventures, lie fleeting moments so subtle, you've probably missed them entirely. The true brilliance of Rick and Morty isn't just in its interdimensional chaos or scientific madness, but in those split-second expressions where Rick's mask slips just enough to reveal the broken man beneath. These microscopically small details tell a completely different story than his loud proclamations about nothing mattering. The beauty of Rick and Morty is how it rewards attentive viewing with layers of emotional depth that casual viewers might never notice. When you slow down and really observe Rick Sanchez, you'll discover an entirely different character hidden in plain sight. The creators deliberately embedded these moments throughout the series, knowing that most viewers would be too caught up in the show's rapid-fire jokes and complex sci-fi concepts to notice them the first time around. Take those brief instances when Rick glances at Morty while he's not looking. These aren't random animation choices. They're carefully crafted windows into Rick's psyche. In these unguarded moments, when Rick believes no one is watching him watch Morty, his face softens ever so slightly. His brow unfurrows, his perpetual scowl relaxes, and for just a frame or two, we glimpse something that looks suspiciously like pride or affection. These moments happen so quickly that without pausing or rewatching, they simply register as background animation rather than the character revelations they actually are. The show's animation team excels at communicating volumes through minimal changes in Rick's expressions. A slight tremor in his hand as he reaches for his flask after a particularly close call with Morty. A momentary widening of his eyes when family appears in danger before quickly reverting to his standard half-lidded disinterest. These subtle details aren't merely stylistic choices. They're deliberate narrative tools that contradict Rick's verbal assertions of detachment. What makes these moments particularly powerful is how they're often juxtaposed against Rick's most outrageous behaviors. Following a scene where Rick has been callously dismissive of Morty's feelings, the camera might linger on him for just a beat too long, capturing a flicker of regret crossing his face. If you're not paying close attention, these quick transitions between Rick's performed indifference and his genuine emotion are easy to miss entirely. The quiet scenes between adventures offer even richer territory for these hidden emotional revelations. While most of the show focuses on high-stakes, adrenaline-pumping scenarios, some of the most telling moments happen during downtime, in the garage workshop, or late at night when the Smith household is asleep. In these contemplative interludes, we occasionally find Rick simply watching Morty sleep, his typical animation style softening ever so slightly. These aren't played for laughs or plot advancement. They exist purely to develop Rick's character in ways he would never allow if he knew we were watching. These protective moments reveal something profound about Rick that directly contradicts his stated philosophy. Despite his insistence that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, he repeatedly demonstrates through these small, private gestures that this specific Morty matters deeply to him. The creators have even commented on this aspect of the show, noting that they intentionally include these quiet scenes to reward viewers who are paying especially close attention. The show's use of silence is particularly effective in emphasizing the emotional weight of these moments. In a series known for its rapid-fire dialogue and constant background noise, the rare instances of complete silence create a powerful contrast. When the soundtrack drops away entirely and we're left with just Rick's breathing or the subtle ambient sounds of the garage, These pauses invite us to sit with the character's emotions rather than rush past them. The pacing slows down dramatically during these scenes, creating small pockets of emotional reality amidst the chaotic comedy. Some of the most revealing moments happen when Rick doesn't realize he's being observed. There's a recurring visual motif throughout the series where Rick watches Morty from a distance, through a window, from across a room, or from the shadows. In these scenes, Rick's typical defensive posturing falls away completely. His shoulders relax, his expression softens, and we see glimpses of vulnerability that he would never willingly show. These moments stand in stark contrast to Rick's behavior when he knows others are watching, highlighting just how much of his personality is a carefully maintained performance. Background details in the animation often tell their own story about Rick's emotional state. The organization of his workspace, the items he chooses to keep close at hand, and even the way he arranges family photos all provide subtle clues about his priorities and attachments. After particularly emotional episodes, keen-eyed viewers might notice small changes to Rick's environment that reflect his inner turmoil. A family photo that wasn't there before, or a memento from an adventure with Morty given unexpected prominence. The animation style itself shifts during these emotionally charged moments. The typical sharp lines and vibrant colors of the show's standard animation briefly give way to softer edges and more muted tones, creating a visual language that communicates emotional significance without a single word of dialogue. These stylistic shifts are so subtle that they register more as a feeling than an obvious visual change, but they're consistently employed to highlight Rick's most vulnerable moments. What makes these details so powerful is how they create a profound tension between Rick's stated beliefs and his actual feelings. While he loudly proclaims the meaninglessness of attachment in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, these quiet moments reveal a man desperately clinging to specific relationships despite his intellectual understanding of their cosmic insignificance. This fundamental contradiction forms the emotional core of Rick's character, and it's communicated almost entirely through animation details that most viewers will miss completely. By slowing down and paying attention to these subtle moments, we discover a far more complex portrait of Rick Sanchez than his outward persona suggests. The true brilliance of Rick and Morty lies not just in its elaborate sci-fi concepts or its sharp comedy, but in the extraordinary care the creators have taken to embed genuine emotional depth within a show that could easily have succeeded without it. The emotional revelations aren't just hidden as Easter eggs. They're carefully placed breadcrumbs leading us toward a much deeper understanding of one of animation's most fascinating characters. Every breadcrumb of emotional depth we've discussed follows a map that only becomes visible when you arrange these episodes in a specific order. Behind the portal-hopping chaos and interdimensional mayhem lies something few fans ever discover: a deliberately sequenced emotional journey tracking Rick's transformation from nihilistic scientist to something far more human. The true genius of Rick and Morty isn't just in what each episode contains, but in how these episodes were designed to resonate with each other across seasons. This compilation isn't just a random collection of adventures. It's a carefully constructed narrative pathway. When viewed in isolation or streamed randomly, each episode feels like a standalone sci-fi romp. But the creators have been playing a longer game all along. Scott Marder once revealed they've mapped out a full 10-season saga, with Rick's emotional development serving as the backbone of this grand plan. This long-term vision explains why certain emotional beats only make sense when experienced in their intended progression. What makes this sequence so compelling is how it creates a rhythm between the show's high-concept sci-fi adventures and its more character-focused episodes. Notice how after an episode packed with interdimensional chaos, we're often given a quieter, more reflective story that allows Rick's emotional world to expand. This pacing isn't accidental. It's deliberately designed to create emotional ebbs and flows that mirror how people process their own feelings, making these episodes particularly conducive to pre-sleep viewing when our own minds are processing the day's events. In the Season 5 finale, we discover that Rick's obsession with hunting down Rick Prime isn't just about revenge. It's a window into how deeply his past traumas have shaped his current identity. This revelation transforms our understanding of his motivations throughout all previous seasons. Suddenly, his emotional distance, his drinking, his reluctance to form attachments, they all connect to this fundamental wound. But this insight only lands with its full emotional impact if you followed the breadcrumbs laid throughout earlier episodes. The sequence builds toward these revelations gradually, with each episode adding another layer to our understanding of Rick's character. Early episodes establish his emotional barriers, showing us the fortress he's built around himself. Then, strategically placed throughout the series, we get episodes that begin to dismantle these defenses. Each one serves as an emotional anchor in Rick's journey, a moment where another piece of his cynical armor falls away, revealing the wounded human beneath. Take The Old Man in the Seat, which explores Rick's inability to connect with others through a surprisingly mundane storyline about a private toilet. This episode hits differently when positioned between higher-stakes adventures, creating a moment of emotional clarity amidst the chaos. The contrast heightens our awareness of Rick's isolation and his desperate need for something that belongs only to him, a need that contradicts his stated belief that nothing matters. What's fascinating about this compilation is how certain episodes are strategically positioned to create emotional resonance with each other, even when they're separated by seasons. Themes introduced in Season 1 find their completion in Season 5. Character moments that seemed insignificant at first viewing suddenly take on profound meaning when juxtaposed with later developments. This deliberate structuring creates a coherent narrative that reveals Rick's character evolution in a way that casual viewing simply can't capture. The sequence also highlights how Rick's journey toward emotional connection isn't a straight line but rather a series of advances and retreats. We see him make significant breakthroughs in vulnerability, only to double down on his cynicism in the following episode. This pattern reflects the messy reality of emotional growth. It's never clean or linear, especially for someone as damaged as Rick. By arranging these episodes to highlight this pattern, the compilation creates a more authentic portrait of psychological healing. These carefully sequenced episodes also build toward key revelations about Rick's past that transform our understanding of his character. His motivations, initially obscured by his cynical exterior, gradually come into focus as the narrative progresses. We begin to see that his nihilism isn't his core philosophy. It's a defense mechanism adopted in response to profound loss and trauma. This insight delivers a powerful emotional payoff that resonates more deeply when experienced through this deliberate progression. The pacing between emotional revelations and sci-fi adventures creates a rhythm that's surprisingly conducive to relaxation. High-concept episodes stimulate the imagination, while character-focused moments engage our empathy. This alternating pattern creates a viewing experience that keeps us engaged without becoming overwhelming, perfect for transitioning into sleep. The emotional journey unfolds at a pace that allows for reflection, making it easier for viewers to process the deeper themes while winding down. What's remarkable about Rick's emotional journey is how it becomes a lens through which we can view our own relationship with vulnerability. As we watch Rick struggle to maintain his emotional barriers while simultaneously yearning for connection, we see a reflection of the universal human experience. This emotional resonance is enhanced by experiencing these episodes in their intended sequence, allowing viewers to journey alongside Rick rather than dropping in and out of random moments in his life. The creators have emphasized that episode sequencing plays a crucial role in revealing Rick's character development. By arranging episodes to highlight key emotional moments, they've created a coherent narrative that resonates more deeply with viewers. This intentional structuring enhances our understanding of Rick's evolution, allowing us to experience his journey in a more profound way than if we were watching episodes in random order or based solely on their release dates. In the wider context of the series' narrative structure, the Season 6 finale builds upon earlier emotional foundations to explore the consequences of Rick's actions. His obsession with hunting Rick Prime isn't introduced out of nowhere. It's the culmination of emotional threads woven throughout previous seasons. This long-term storytelling approach rewards attentive viewers who follow Rick's journey in sequence, providing emotional payoffs that might be missed by casual viewers. While casual viewers might focus on the sci-fi spectacle, the most revealing clues about Rick's universe are buried in his moments of emotional vulnerability. The revelation that Rick Prime erased Diane from every universe doesn't just explain Rick's trauma. It completely transforms our understanding of how the multiverse works and why certain patterns repeat across dimensions. What if these emotional episodes aren't just character development but actually contain the answers to the show's biggest mysteries? Rick Prime's erasure of Diane across multiple universes reveals something fundamental about the structure of the multiverse itself. This isn't just backstory, it's a massive revelation about how reality functions in the Rick and Morty universe. The fact that one Rick could systematically remove a specific person from multiple realities suggests that the multiverse isn't just random variations, but rather follows certain patterns and rules that even Ricks can manipulate. The emotional stakes of UNT Rickon expand our understanding of the multiverse in ways that pure sci-fi exposition never could. When we see Rick's obsession with hunting down Rick Prime, we're witnessing more than just a revenge plot. We're seeing confirmation that certain events and characters maintain consistency across dimensions. This supports the fan theory that despite infinite possibilities, there are central finite curves, where certain relationships and dynamics must exist. Rick's emotional journey isn't just personal, it's actually providing us with the framework for how the multiverse functions. This pattern becomes even more interesting when we consider Evil Morty's return in UNM Rickon. His ability to easily defeat Rick Prime isn't just a cool plot twist, it's evidence supporting theories about the hierarchy of power in the multiverse. While Ricks believe themselves to be the apex predators of reality, Evil Morty's actions suggest that Mortys, who break free from their designated roles, might actually have greater potential. This completely subverts our understanding of how power works across dimensions and hints that Rick's perspective on the multiverse might be fundamentally limited by his own biases. The emotional dynamics between characters actually reveal more about the multiverse's structure than any sci-fi infodump could. In Fear No Morty, when we see Morty's subconscious fear of being replaceable, we're actually getting insight into the uncomfortable truth about multiversal constants. The episode confirms what fans have long suspected, that the Rick-Morty relationship is somehow fundamental to the structure of reality itself, not just a random pairing. When Rick chooses not to pursue a false vision of Diane, but instead affirms his bond with Morty, we're seeing confirmation that certain relationships transcend even the most powerful emotional pulls. These emotional threads create a fascinating pattern across episodes. In moments when Rick drops his guard, we see glimpses of a cohesive theory about the universe, one where emotional connections actually function as anchors across dimensions. This suggests that far from being meaningless in an infinite multiverse, emotions might be the only constants. The way Rick forms attachments, despite knowing infinite versions exist, hints at a deeper truth, that specific emotional bonds might be unique even in infinite variation. The creators have strategically placed these revelations in emotionally charged scenes because they know that's when viewers are most receptive to major shifts in understanding. When Rick is emotionally vulnerable, we're emotionally vulnerable too. The perfect moment to reshape our understanding of how the universe works. This technique creates a powerful connection between character development and world building that most sci-fi shows never achieve. The implications go beyond just Rick and Morty's relationship. If we pay attention to Rick's emotional reactions to multiverse travel, we notice subtle differences in how he responds to certain dimensions versus others. Some clearly make him uncomfortable in ways that go beyond the obvious differences. This supports the theory that Rick isn't just randomly traveling through infinite possibilities. He's navigating a specific subset of the multiverse where certain rules apply. His emotional responses are actually mapping out the boundaries of this central finite curve for attentive viewers. Rick's relationship with other Ricks provides even more evidence for this theory. Notice how Rick C-137 consistently positions himself as different from other Ricks despite sharing many of their traits. This isn't just ego. It's confirmation that despite superficial similarities, there are fundamental differences between versions of the same person across dimensions. The emotional tension between Ricks suggests that identity itself might be both more fluid and more fixed than we initially assumed in a multiverse context. The connections between seemingly unrelated episodes become clear when viewed through this emotional lens. Story threads that seemed abandoned in earlier seasons suddenly reappear, suggesting that the creators have been building toward these revelations all along. The way Rick's backstory gradually unfolds across emotional moments in different episodes indicates that there's a cohesive theory of reality underlying the apparent chaos of the show. Even more compelling is how Rick's growing connection with Morty seems to influence his ability to navigate the multiverse. As their bond strengthens, Rick seems to gain new insights and abilities, suggesting that emotional connections might actually enhance rather than hinder scientific understanding of multiversal travel. This directly contradicts Rick's stated belief that emotions are weaknesses, revealing that his entire scientific worldview might be fundamentally flawed. These emotionally charged episodes are gradually revealing what might be the show's biggest mystery. Not just who Rick is, but why he is the way he is. The hints suggest that Rick's identity is intimately tied to the structure of the multiverse itself, that perhaps his experiments with multiversal travel actually helped shape the rules of reality as they currently exist. This would explain why he seems to have special status even among other Ricks. What these emotional revelations ultimately suggest is that the most popular fan theory might be true, that Rick's scientific genius and emotional journey aren't separate storylines but fundamentally interconnected aspects of the same mystery. The way he processes grief, forms attachments, and navigates relationships isn't just character development. It's actually the key to understanding how the multiverse functions and why certain patterns repeat across dimensions. Rick's multiverse adventures might decode reality, but they're also decoding something much closer to home: your sleep patterns. Despite being known for its frenetic energy, certain episodes create a paradoxical effect where the very same show that stimulates your imagination during the day becomes the perfect lullaby at night. And science can actually explain why this contradiction works. It's a curious phenomenon that has puzzled fans for years. How can a show that's literally built on interdimensional chaos somehow guide you into a peaceful slumber? The answer lies in understanding how our brains process media before sleep, and the surprising ways certain Rick and Morty episodes create the perfect neurological conditions for drifting off. When we examine the show's typical energy, rapid-fire dialogue, neon color explosions, and dimension-hopping action, it seems counterintuitive that it could ever serve as sleep material. Yet specific episodes strike a remarkable balance between engagement and relaxation. These episodes tend to feature more character-driven narratives and emotional depth rather than the adrenaline-fueled adventures we typically associate with the series. The visual aspects play a crucial role in this transition. While Rick and Morty is known for its vibrant palette, episodes that focus on emotional storytelling often incorporate softer color schemes and gentler visual transitions. These visual elements create what sleep researchers might call a hypnagogic quality, that dreamy state between wakefulness and sleep where our minds are receptive but gradually slowing down. According to research, exposure to blue light from screens can inhibit melatonin production, making it harder to fall asleep. However, episodes that feature tranquil settings or slower action sequences with softer color palettes can counteract this effect by creating a soothing atmosphere more conducive to sleep. The show's artists unconsciously created these sleep-friendly visual landscapes during episodes that explore Rick's inner emotional world rather than external chaos. The pacing of these episodes follows a rhythm that's surprisingly compatible with our natural sleep cycles. Episodes with emotional depth tend to include moments of reflection and contemplation between plot points, creating a natural ebb and flow that mimics the brain's transition towards sleep. These episodes allow for longer pauses and reflective moments that contrast with the show's typical frenetic energy, helping viewers relax and prepare for sleep. Viewer feedback consistently highlights that episodes with less chaotic humor and more character-driven narratives are preferred for relaxation. This makes perfect sense from a neurological perspective. Our brains remain engaged with the story and characters, but aren't constantly bombarded with stimuli that trigger alertness responses. It's a delicate balance that the show somehow manages to achieve despite its reputation for wild science fiction concepts. The soundtrack deserves special attention when understanding the sleep-inducing qualities of these episodes. The use of ambient music and softer melodies during emotional scenes enhances the calming effect, making it easier for viewers to transition into a sleep-ready state. Where high-energy episodes feature jarring sounds and rapid auditory transitions, these more contemplative entries allow the audio to wash over you in waves, almost like a sonic lullaby hidden within the bizarre adventures. Interestingly, user comments frequently cite episodes like Total Rickle and The Ricklantis Mix-Up as too stimulating for bedtime viewing due to their fast-paced narratives and complex plots. In contrast, episodes that focus on emotional depth, such as The Wedding Squanchers, are considered more relaxing and suitable for winding down. This viewer feedback aligns perfectly with sleep science. Our brains need a gradual reduction in stimulation to transition to sleep, not constant cognitive challenges. The philosophical nature of certain episodes also contributes to their sleep-friendly qualities. While that might seem contradictory, how could deep thinking help you sleep? It actually creates the perfect mental state. These episodes pose existential questions that engage your mind without requiring the rapid problem-solving that keeps you alert. Instead, they invite contemplation about meaning and purpose, the kind of gentle mental wandering that can actually ease you towards sleep rather than fighting against it. When Rick contemplates his place in the multiverse or questions whether his connections matter, these aren't just character moments. They're creating a mental space where viewers can ponder alongside him. This philosophical engagement occupies the mind just enough to prevent random thoughts from keeping you awake, while not demanding the kind of active attention that would maintain alertness. It's a cognitive sweet spot for sleep induction. There's also something inherently comforting about watching emotional moments in familiar characters' lives. The show creates a sense of intimacy and safety, even within its wildest concepts. When we watch Rick struggle with vulnerability or witness moments of genuine connection between characters, it triggers our brain's empathy responses rather than our alertness mechanisms. This emotional resonance creates a sense of psychological safety that's essential for falling asleep. The pacing of these episodes deserves further examination. While standard Rick and Morty adventures might jump between locations, timelines, and dimensions at breakneck speed, the more contemplative episodes establish a more measured rhythm. This consistent pacing helps regulate our attention rather than constantly redirecting it, another key factor in preparing the mind for sleep. Many viewers report that these episodes work best when you've already seen them before. This makes perfect sense psychologically. The familiarity removes the need to follow every plot development actively, allowing you to drift in and out of attention without losing the emotional thread. Your brain isn't working to process new information, but instead revisiting emotional landscapes it already understands. The combination of these elements creates a unique viewing experience that transforms a seemingly chaotic show into an effective sleep aid. The marriage of philosophical questions, emotional storytelling, gentle visual transitions, ambient sound design, and measured pacing creates a perfect neurological pathway from alertness to drowsiness. It's almost as if certain episodes were unintentionally crafted to guide you through the portal between wakefulness and dreams. That portal between wakefulness and dreams isn't just a metaphor for falling asleep. It's exactly how Rick and Morty delivers its most profound messages. The show's writers have mastered a strange alchemy where the crudest joke can suddenly give way to a moment of devastating emotional clarity. Why does a burp-punctuated monologue about meaninglessness hit harder than a serious philosophical lecture ever could? It's because Rick and Morty has perfected the art of philosophical ambush, hiding existential truth bombs behind a shield of crude humor that disarms us completely. When we think about profound philosophical television, we rarely picture a show featuring an entire civilization inside a car battery, or a character named Mr. Poopy Butthole. Yet Rick and Morty consistently uses its comedic elements as a Trojan horse to deliver deeper contemplations on existence. It's like the creators discovered that wrapping existentialism in toilet humor makes it more digestible, allowing viewers to engage with complex ideas without feeling lectured. In A Rickle in Time, what begins as a funny premise about time splitting into multiple possibilities evolves into a powerful examination of guilt and responsibility. Rick's character grapples with the consequences of his actions, while the episode maintains its comedic tone through absurd situations. This juxtaposition actually heightens the emotional impact. We're laughing one moment and then suddenly confronted with Rick's deeper emotional struggles. The humor doesn't diminish the philosophical weight. It actually makes it more accessible. The show's approach to balancing comedy and emotional depth isn't accidental. According to the creators, this balance is deliberately crafted during the writing process. They aim to create moments that resonate emotionally while maintaining the show's signature comedic tone. This is particularly evident in episodes that conclude not with a joke, but with a poignant moment that lingers with viewers long after watching. Rick Potion number 9 Feet exemplifies this brilliantly. The episode starts with a typical sci-fi comedy premise. Morty wants a love potion for his crush, but gradually transforms into an exploration of existential dread. The humor throughout serves to highlight the absurdity of their situation. But by the end, as Morty and Rick bury their own dead bodies in an alternate reality, viewers are left contemplating the fragility of existence. The episode's final shot of Morty staring blankly, while contemplative music plays, creates a stark contrast to the episode's earlier comedic chaos. What makes this technique particularly effective is how the humor often acts as a shield, not just for viewers but for the characters themselves. Rick's jokes frequently function as a defense mechanism, allowing him to avoid confronting his vulnerabilities. In The Old Man in the Seat, what starts as a comedic conflict over someone using Rick's private toilet evolves into a profound exploration of his inability to form connections. The toilet squatter conflict provides a humorous backdrop that makes Rick's emotional struggles even more impactful when they're finally revealed. The visual language of the show shifts subtly between its comedic and philosophical moments. During laugh-out-loud sequences, the animation often features bright colors, exaggerated expressions, and dynamic movement. But when the show transitions to its more contemplative moments, the visual style becomes more subdued and measured. Colors take on more muted tones, camera movements slow down, and the framing becomes more deliberate. These visual shifts prepare our brains for the tonal change, creating a seamless transition from comedy to contemplation that makes both aspects more effective. It's worth noting how Rick and Morty uses humor specifically to tackle philosophical questions through the lens of absurdity. This approach allows viewers to engage with complex ideas about identity, morality, and the search for meaning without feeling overwhelmed. By couching these heavy concepts in comedy, the show creates a safe space for viewers to consider difficult questions. When Rick makes a crude joke about the meaninglessness of existence, we're laughing while simultaneously pondering our place in the universe. The creators have noted that this balance isn't just about entertainment, it's about accessing emotional truths that might otherwise be too uncomfortable to face directly. By using humor as a buffer, the show can explore darker themes like depression, isolation, and existential despair without becoming unbearably heavy. This emotional roller coaster, from laughter to philosophical contemplation and back again, creates a unique viewing experience that keeps audiences engaged on multiple levels. Take the episode Autoerotic Assimilation, which begins with the comedic premise of Rick reconnecting with a hive-mind ex-girlfriend. The humor throughout the episode masks what's actually a deep exploration of toxic relationships and depression. When the final scene shows Rick attempting suicide after being abandoned, the impact is all the more powerful because of the comedic buildup that preceded it. The joke isn't used to undermine the emotion, it's used to amplify it through contrast. This technique extends to the show's approach to character development as well. Rick's most profound character moments often occur immediately after his most outrageous jokes. It's as if the humor creates enough emotional distance for both Rick and the audience to finally confront the deeper truths that might otherwise be too painful to acknowledge. In these moments, Rick's cynicism is revealed not as a philosophical stance, but as a response to profound emotional pain. The show's sound design also plays a crucial role in these transitions. Comic scenes feature fast-paced dialogue and energetic music, while philosophical moments are often accompanied by ambient sounds and quieter scoring. This auditory shift helps guide viewers through the emotional journey, signaling when it's time to laugh and when it's time to reflect. What's perhaps most remarkable about Rick and Morty's approach is how it makes philosophical concepts accessible without dumbing them down. Rather than explaining existentialism directly, The show demonstrates it through scenarios that are simultaneously ridiculous and profound. When Rick explains to Morty that they've destroyed their original universe and must take the place of their dead counterparts in another reality, he does so with such casual detachment that the horror of the situation becomes both funnier and more disturbing. The show seems to understand that humor and philosophy aren't opposing forces, but complementary tools for understanding the human condition. The absurdity of existence is both the source of the show's comedy and the foundation of its philosophical inquiries. By embracing this connection, Rick and Morty creates a viewing experience that entertains while encouraging deeper thought. Have you ever wondered if Rick's "nothing matters" philosophy was there from the beginning, or if it evolved over time? When we first meet Rick Sanchez in the pilot episode, he already appears to have his nihilistic worldview fully formed. He wakes Morty up in the middle of the night, drunk and rambling about how school is a waste of time and how he's going to blow up the world. Right from the start, Rick establishes himself as someone who seemingly doesn't care about consequences or conventional morality. But there's something fascinating happening beneath the surface. While Rick verbally espouses that nothing matters in this infinite multiverse, his actions tell a completely different story. In that same pilot episode where he talks about destroying the world, we see him go to extraordinary lengths to protect Morty. He claims not to care about anything, yet he specifically chooses to live with his daughter's family rather than alone. This contradiction forms the foundation of Rick's character, a man whose words and actions are constantly at odds. Season 1 is particularly interesting because the animation style, while less refined than later seasons, contains subtle details that reveal Rick's inner conflict. Pay attention to Rick's eyes during emotional moments. The animators frequently give him micro-expressions that last only a frame or two. When Beth expresses appreciation for him being there, his eyes often briefly soften before he covers with a sarcastic remark. These animation choices aren't accidental. They're deliberate windows into Rick's suppressed emotional world. One of the most revealing early episodes is Rick Potion number 9, where Rick's cavalier attitude about abandoning their original universe seems shocking. He casually leads Morty to a reality where they've died, buries their own bodies, and replaces their alternate selves without much apparent remorse. "Don't think about it," he tells a traumatized Morty. On the surface, this reinforces his nihilistic stance that no particular reality matters more than another. But look closer at the animation during this scene. Rick avoids eye contact, his movements are stiffer, and his voice performance contains subtle strain. These are tells that Rick isn't as emotionally detached as he pretends to be. Rick's relationship with the Smith family in these early episodes is particularly revealing. He consistently maintains verbal distance, calling Jerry by the wrong name, dismissing Beth's attempts at connection, and treating Summer as an afterthought. Yet he continues to live with them rather than in any of the infinite locations available to him across the multiverse. In Anatomy Park, we get a hint about why when he uncomfortably accepts Jerry's Christmas invitation rather than leaving. The episode briefly shows Rick looking at old family photos when he thinks no one is watching, a moment that completely contradicts his stated indifference. Then there's Rick's ever-present flask. His drinking isn't just a character quirk, it's a mechanism for emotional suppression. The pattern becomes clear in these early episodes. Whenever confronted with genuine emotion or vulnerability, Rick reaches for his flask. In Me Seeks and Destroy, when Morty asserts independence and demands that Rick follow his lead on an adventure, Rick's drinking increases noticeably throughout the episode. The animation emphasizes this by showing more close-ups of the flask and more exaggerated drinking motions. It's a visual reminder that Rick's alcohol consumption directly correlates with his emotional discomfort. What makes Season 1 so compelling is watching for the moments when Rick's nihilistic facade momentarily cracks. In Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, we get our first glimpse of Rick genuinely disturbed by the torture of alternate Mortys. His typical detachment falters, and for a brief moment, we see authentic moral outrage. Similarly, in Ricksy Business, when Bird Person warns Morty about Rick's pain, we're given our first explicit confirmation that Rick's nihilism might be a response to suffering rather than a philosophical conclusion. The most revealing early crack in Rick's armor comes in Something Rick This Way. Comes when he builds an entire business just to spite the devil after the devil makes Summer feel bad. Rick claims he doesn't care about anyone, yet he spends enormous resources and energy defending his granddaughter. When confronted about this contradiction, Rick deflects with humor or anger, another pattern that persists throughout the series. His defensiveness itself becomes evidence that there's something deeper happening beneath his nihilistic exterior. What's becoming clear as we examine these early episodes is that Rick's nihilism isn't a genuine philosophical position. It's a psychological defense mechanism. Rick doesn't actually believe nothing matters. He's terrified that things do matter, and that caring leads to pain. His dismissive attitude isn't the worldview of someone who has transcended emotional attachment. It's the protective shell of someone who's been profoundly hurt and is desperately trying to avoid being hurt again. The animation reinforces this reading through subtle visual cues. Notice how Rick's slouched posture straightens when family members are in danger. Watch how his pupils dilate slightly during emotional conversations before he cuts them off with a crude joke. Pay attention to the slight tremor in his hands that appears only when he's confronted with genuine connection before he steadies them with a drink. These intentional animation choices tell us what Rick cannot admit to himself, that his nihilism is a facade covering deep emotional wounds. By the end of Season 1, we're left with a far more complex character than the simple nihilist Rick initially presents himself to be. His nothing matters philosophy isn't something he arrived at through pure scientific rationality. It's emotional armor. The true brilliance of these early episodes is how they establish this fundamental contradiction in Rick's character. A man whose actions of care and protection constantly undermine his verbal insistence that nothing matters. If Rick's nihilism is his verbal shield, then his portal technology is his physical one. Those swirling green vortices appear with suspicious timing throughout Season 1, almost always when Rick is confronted with emotional situations he can't handle. What initially seems like a convenient plot device for wild adventures turns out to be something far more revealing. The color psychology in these portal transitions tells us more about Rick's inner turmoil than any dialogue ever could. Notice how frequently Rick reaches for his portal gun precisely when family conversations get uncomfortable? It's almost like a reflex. Emotions start bubbling up, and suddenly Rick needs to be literally anywhere else in the multiverse. That iconic green glow isn't just a cool visual effect. It's the color of Rick running away from his feelings. The shifting colors during portal transitions aren't random design choices. The animation team deliberately designed those trippy portal transitions to mirror the fragmentation happening inside Rick's mind. As realities blend together in these sequences, we're actually watching a visual representation of Rick's emotional state. Chaotic, disconnected, and constantly in flux. The portal isn't just taking him somewhere new, it's reflecting how he feels inside. This becomes painfully obvious in Rick Potion number 9, when Rick casually abandons an entire reality after causing its destruction. The ease with which he hops to another dimension isn't just shocking plot convenience, it's a perfect manifestation of his emotional detachment. Rather than face the consequences of his actions, Rick's solution is simply to leave and find a reality where the problem doesn't exist, or at least where a convenient version of themselves has just died. The portal makes emotional escapism literally possible. What's particularly telling is how these portal sequences are animated. The swirling, pulsing vortex creates a sense of both wonder and disconnection. When Rick and Morty enter a portal, they're momentarily suspended between worlds, neither here nor there, just like Rick's emotional availability to his family. He's physically present, but emotionally elsewhere, and the portal technology gives literal form to this state of being. The musical choices during these portal scenes further emphasize this duality. The soundscapes shift dramatically when a portal opens, often moving from tense family arguments to the expansive, ethereal sounds of interdimensional travel. This auditory shift mirrors Rick's emotional release valve. He escapes the confined, uncomfortable emotions of family life for the vast emptiness of the multiverse where nothing needs to matter. Rick's relationship with his portal gun becomes even more revealing when we consider how it functions in the story. It's always at his side, ready to create an escape route whenever things get too real. Think about how often Rick pulls it out mid-conversation or after a particularly vulnerable moment. It's not just a tool for adventure, it's his emotional panic button. The trippy visuals of interdimensional travel serve as a perfect metaphor for Rick's internal fragmentation. As he and Morty are stretched, distorted, and reassembled through the portal, we're seeing an external visualization of Rick's internal state, broken into pieces, chaotic, struggling to maintain coherence. The portal doesn't just transport Rick, it expresses him. Creator commentary suggests that the portal technology wasn't just designed as a convenient plot device, but as a deeper commentary on Rick's character. It represents his desire to escape the pain of his past and the complexities of his relationships. That's why the green color is so significant. It's the color of Rick's escape, his refusal to stay and work through difficult emotions. There's something particularly telling about the moments when Rick doesn't have access to his portal gun. In these instances, he becomes noticeably more agitated, as if his emotional safety net has been removed. Without the ability to physically escape, Rick is forced to confront feelings he'd rather avoid. It's in these portal-less moments that we often see Rick at his most vulnerable. The very design of the portal technology reflects Rick's emotional approach to life. It's impressive, efficient, and lets him bypass normal barriers, but it also allows him to avoid growing or healing. Just as he can skip the normal process of traveling from point A to point B, Rick uses the portal to skip the normal process of emotional development and conflict resolution. Perhaps most revealing is how Rick's portal use evolves throughout the series. In early episodes, he's quick to open a portal for almost any reason, often just to grab a snack or avoid a dull moment. This casual approach to reality hopping mirrors his casual dismissal of emotional connections. If this reality isn't working for him, he'll just find another one. No need to put in the work to fix what's broken. The portal gun functions as both Rick's greatest invention and his greatest emotional crutch. It's the perfect symbol of his genius. No other Rick has created quite the same portable technology, but it's also the perfect embodiment of his fundamental flaw. He can escape any physical situation, but remains trapped in the same emotional patterns regardless of which dimension he's in. The portal can take Rick anywhere except where he most needs to go, toward genuine emotional connection and healing. For all his intellect and bravado, the multiverse occasionally presents Rick with a humbling truth. He is not always the apex predator in the cosmic food chain. These encounters with superior beings don't just challenge Rick's position, they strike at the very core of his identity. When the smartest man in the universe meets something smarter, the results are fascinating glimpses into his psychological makeup, revealed through subtle but deliberate animation choices. The Pickle Rick episode provides one of the most transparent examples of Rick's avoidance behaviors. By transforming himself into a pickle, Rick creates an elaborate physical escape from something far more terrifying than any alien monster: the vulnerability of family therapy. This isn't just Rick being difficult, it's Rick being terrified. The pickle transformation serves as a perfect metaphor for his fear of emotional confrontation. He would literally rather turn himself into a vegetable than face the possibility of being psychologically exposed in a therapy session. What makes these confrontations with superior forces so revealing is how the show's animation style dramatically shifts during these moments. When Rick faces truly cosmic entities, the visual language of the show transforms. The backgrounds become more surreal, colors darken or intensify, and Rick's facial expressions, normally controlled and cynical, contort into unmistakable terror. These stylistic choices aren't random. They're deliberate visual cues that we're seeing Rick at his most authentic and stripped of pretense. The Council of Ricks represents a particularly fascinating challenge to Rick's self-image. Facing a governing body made up entirely of alternate versions of himself forces Rick to confront a terrifying possibility: that he might not be special. Despite his dimension-hopping adventures, the existence of countless other Ricks triggers a profound identity crisis. Is he just another Rick in an infinite line of Ricks? The animation during these council scenes often employs subtle shifts in perspective and scale to emphasize Rick's sudden feeling of smallness in a vast multiverse. Rick's interactions with Unity, the hive mind entity capable of assimilating entire civilizations, expose another layer of his complex psychology. Here is a being that not only matches Rick's intelligence, but exceeds his capabilities in certain ways. What's revealing isn't just that Rick develops a relationship with Unity, but how devastated he is when Unity leaves him. The abandonment triggers one of Rick's darkest moments, suggesting that his fear isn't just about being outmatched intellectually. It's about being deemed unworthy of connection by something he actually respects. The animation techniques employed during these encounters with godlike entities are particularly telling. Rick's facial expressions become exaggerated and surreal, often with wider eyes and more pronounced movement lines that emphasize his emotional distress. The backgrounds shift away from the show's standard style into more abstract, unsettling designs that reflect Rick's internal state. These visual cues serve as windows into Rick's unraveling psyche when his carefully constructed facade of control crumbles. Rick's desperate need to be the smartest person in every room isn't just arrogance, it's a defense mechanism rooted in profound insecurity. When faced with beings that dwarf his intelligence, the animation often includes subtle details like Rick's hunched posture becoming more pronounced, or his movements becoming more erratic. His voice might crack or shift in pitch during these moments, another auditory clue that we're seeing authentic fear rather than calculated behavior. What's particularly noteworthy is how these confrontations with cosmic powers align with philosophical concepts of existential dread. Rick's entire worldview is built around his ability to understand, manipulate, and control the universe through science. When he encounters entities that render his understanding incomplete or irrelevant, he's forced to grapple with the meaninglessness of existence. These moments challenge his belief in his own superiority and expose the fragility of the identity he's constructed. The Pickle Rick episode embodies this theme perfectly. While the pickle transformation initially seems like just another example of Rick's brilliance, it ultimately reveals his inability to face emotional truths. The elaborate escape plan, turning himself into a pickle to avoid therapy, shows the lengths to which Rick will go to maintain his illusion of control. When Dr. Wong later points out that Rick views his intelligence as a burden that justifies toxic behavior, we see Rick genuinely uncomfortable, not with a cosmic entity, but with simple human insight that cuts through his defenses. These encounters with superior beings often feature moments where the animation briefly pauses on Rick's face, showing micro-expressions of fear or awe before he reasserts his typical demeanor. It's in these fleeting frames that we see the most honest version of Rick, a man confronting his cosmic insignificance despite his considerable intelligence. The pause serves as a visual breath, a moment for the audience to register what Rick himself is experiencing: absolute terror in the face of forces beyond his control. Rick's reactions to these encounters typically follow a pattern. First comes shock, then fear, then desperate attempts to reassert control through intellect or technology. When these fail, we occasionally glimpse a rare moment of acceptance, a brief acknowledgement that some things in the universe remain beyond even his comprehension. These moments of humility, however fleeting, provide some of the most authentic glimpses into Rick's character. The truth that emerges from these cosmic confrontations is that Rick's fear of being controlled is indeed what drives his need to control everything around him. His portal gun gives him the illusion of absolute freedom, but when faced with beings that strip away this illusion, we see his existential anxiety in its raw form. His need for control isn't just a personality quirk, it's a desperate response to the terror of cosmic insignificance. Control may be Rick's response to cosmic terror, but when that control inevitably slips, he reaches for something surprisingly ordinary: a flask filled with alcohol. What makes this particular coping mechanism so fascinating isn't just its prevalence throughout the series, but how the animation subtly warps and distorts reality whenever Rick drinks, creating a visual language that speaks volumes about his internal suffering before he ever says a word. The show's creators have been remarkably deliberate in their portrayal of Rick's alcoholism. This isn't just some quirky character trait added for comedic effect. It's a window into his trauma and emotional pain. In scenes where Rick's relationships with family members grow increasingly strained, we see him reach for his flask with greater frequency, the action becoming almost automatic. His drinking intensifies precisely when emotional connections threaten to form, suggesting that alcohol serves as his emotional circuit breaker, cutting the power before feelings can fully manifest. The visual storytelling during Rick's drinking scenes is particularly revealing. Watch closely, and you'll notice how the animation style subtly shifts when Rick is intoxicated. Reality itself seems to warp around him, with exaggerated movements and distorted perspectives that mirror his internal disconnection. This technique is especially evident in episodes like Rick Potion Number 9, 9 Inches, and the Ricklantis Mix-Up, where the visual changes serve as a direct representation of Rick's altered mental state. A man desperately trying to blur the edges of a reality he finds too painful to face with clarity. Just as telling is what happens to the sound design in these moments. As Rick drinks, the ambient noise of his surroundings often begins to fade, creating an auditory bubble that emphasizes his withdrawal from the world around him. This sound technique reinforces the idea that alcohol isn't just about physical intoxication for Rick, it's about emotional escape. The quieter the world becomes around him, the deeper we're being pulled into Rick's isolated perspective, a man who can travel anywhere in the multiverse but can't escape the prison of his own mind. The episode Autoerotic Assimilation provides perhaps the most devastating look at Rick's relationship with alcohol. After being abandoned by Unity, the hive mind collective he had been in a relationship with, Rick returns home alone. The sequence that follows contains minimal dialogue but maximum emotional impact. We watch as Rick methodically sets up what appears to be a complex experiment in his garage, only to realize with growing horror that he's preparing to end his life. The moment Unity's rejection fully hits him, he reaches not for his portal gun or some fantastic invention, but for the most mundane escape, a bottle of alcohol. His subsequent failed suicide attempt reveals that Rick's drinking isn't a sign of strength or casual indifference. It's a desperate attempt to numb overwhelming pain. What makes Rick's alcoholism so compelling is how his family reacts to it. Throughout the series, family members make comments about Rick's drinking that reveal they're fully aware of his struggles. Morty's expressions of concern for Rick's well-being are particularly poignant, especially in episodes like The Wedding Squanchers, where his worry becomes palpable. These moments strip away Rick's carefully constructed facade, forcing us to see him not as the untouchable genius, but as a broken man whose self-destructive behaviors affect everyone around him. The animation of Rick's flask itself deserves special attention. It's not merely a prop, but practically a character in its own right, constantly present at Rick's side. Its appearance in scenes often coincides with moments of emotional vulnerability, acting as a visual shorthand for the character's inner turmoil. The show brilliantly uses this simple object to symbolize the complex interplay between Rick's intellectual brilliance and his emotional fragility. This duality is explored extensively in the Ricklantis Mix-Up, where we see how thin the line is between Rick's genius and his self-destruction. Rick's drinking also serves as a fascinating counterpoint to his scientific approach to the universe. For a man who can create interdimensional portals and clone himself at will, there's something profoundly human about his reliance on alcohol, a substance humans have used to alter consciousness since prehistoric times. The most technologically advanced character in the show relies on one of humanity's oldest coping mechanisms, creating a contradiction that speaks volumes about the limitations of intelligence in addressing emotional pain. In the episode where Unity leaves him, we see Rick's drinking escalate from casual sips to dangerous binging. The animation becomes increasingly unstable, with colors bleeding into one another and perspectives shifting unnaturally. This visual degradation perfectly mirrors Rick's emotional state, showing us how his carefully maintained control is dissolving. It's in these moments, when Rick is at his most intoxicated, that we often glimpse his most authentic self, the man behind the cynical scientist facade. What emerges from this pattern is a portrait of addiction as both escape and punishment. Rick doesn't just drink to numb pain. He sometimes seems to drink to intensify it, to feel something authentic in a multiverse he views as meaningless. His relationship with alcohol becomes a manifestation of his complicated relationship with existence itself, simultaneously trying to escape from and connect with reality. The sound design during these drinking sequences further reinforces this duality. As ambient noise fades, we're often left with nothing but Rick's breathing or the sound of liquid sloshing in his flask. This audio isolation creates an intimate connection between viewer and character, forcing us to inhabit Rick's increasingly disconnected experience. We're not just watching Rick drink, we're experiencing the narrowing of his perceptual world as he retreats further inward. Most tellingly, Rick never tries to invent his way out of alcoholism. For all his genius and creativity, he never attempts to create a device that would cure his addiction or process his trauma. This deliberate choice not to solve his own emotional problems technologically speaks volumes about Rick's relationship with his pain. On some level, he seems to understand that his drinking is not a problem to be solved, but an essential part of who he is. The price he pays for his awareness of the multiverse's infinite complexity. For a scientist who prides himself on controlling every variable, Rick's unconscious mind represents the one frontier he can't manipulate. A realm where warm color palettes replace his cool exterior, and family connections he desperately denies while awake suddenly take center stage. Dreams are uniquely revealing for Rick Sanchez because they're the rare state where his defenses completely collapse. Even the most advanced mind in the multiverse can't outsmart his own subconscious. The whirly-dirly conspiracy gives us one of the most visually striking journeys through Rick's mind. When his consciousness is exposed, we're treated to a completely different animation style that's unlike anything we see during his waking hours. The show's artists use rapid perspective shifts and exaggerated expressions to convey the storm of emotions Rick normally keeps bottled up. These surreal sequences don't just look cool, they're actually giving us a window into the parts of himself that Rick works so hard to suppress. What's particularly fascinating about these dream sequences is how the color palette completely transforms. While awake, Rick exists in a world of cool, clinical colors that match his detached persona. But in dreams, those colors shift dramatically to warmer, more emotional tones. This visual transformation isn't just an artistic choice. It's a deliberate storytelling technique that reveals Rick's emotional state beneath his calculated exterior. The chaos of the imagery perfectly mirrors the turmoil of a mind that can't deploy its usual defense mechanisms. Rick's dreams repeatedly fixate on family connections in ways that directly contradict his waking claims of indifference. His subconscious mind seems obsessed with the very emotional attachments he dismisses as meaningless during his conscious hours. These dream sequences expose the significant disconnect between Rick's stated philosophy and his deeper emotional reality. His unconscious prioritizes the relationships he consciously dismisses, showing us that underneath all his scientific knowledge and dimensional travel, Rick remains fundamentally human in his need for connection. Psychological interpretations of Rick's dreams consistently point to his struggle with emotional attachments and the trauma of loss. The fragmented nature of these dream sequences reflects a mind trying to process pain it can't acknowledge while awake. What's particularly revealing is how imagery of his family members appears throughout these dreams, often in contexts that highlight his fear of abandonment. All the barriers Rick constructs during his waking hours, the sarcasm, the drinking, the nihilism, dissolve when he sleeps, leaving only his raw emotional truths. The animation during these sequences doesn't just change stylistically, it becomes a direct visual representation of Rick's emotional state. When Rick's mind is exposed in the whirly-dirly conspiracy, we see imagery that's simultaneously beautiful and disturbing, much like the contradictions within Rick himself. These moments represent some of the show's most experimental animation, using techniques that deliberately break from the show's established visual language to signal we're seeing something fundamentally different. The unfiltered truth of Rick Sanchez. What makes these dream sequences so powerful is how they reveal the enormous energy Rick expends maintaining his emotional walls. In his unconscious state, we see the man behind the mask, someone deeply affected by loss, haunted by regret, and terrified of further abandonment. His dreams expose the tremendous cost of his waking persona, showing us a Rick who isn't dismissive of emotional connection but actually desperate for it. The conflict between these two versions of Rick, the conscious denier and the unconscious yearner, forms the core of his character's complexity. Dreams in Rick and Morty function as truth-telling devices, moments where the show drops its comedic shield and reveals something painfully honest about its protagonist. While Rick carefully constructs his identity as someone above emotional entanglements, his dreams consistently betray him by revealing just how much these connections matter. The unconscious mind becomes the one realm where Rick can't maintain his carefully constructed fiction of detachment. Rick's dream sequences also provide crucial context for understanding his waking behaviors. His excessive drinking, his scientific obsessions, his dimensional hopping, all can be seen as elaborate distractions from the emotional truths his dreams repeatedly confront him with. In this light, Rick's entire waking personality becomes a sophisticated avoidance mechanism, a way to escape the vulnerability his dreams force him to confront. The animation style during these sequences deserves special attention for how effectively it communicates Rick's inner state. The usual clean lines and defined spaces of the show's standard animation give way to fluid, morphing imagery where boundaries dissolve and transform. This visual approach perfectly captures the essence of Rick's character, someone whose rigid exterior hides a far more complex and unstable emotional reality. What's particularly striking about Rick's dreams is how often they focus on family members he claims to be indifferent toward. These sequences don't just feature his family, they often center on them, revealing the depth of his attachment despite his verbal denials. The contrast between his waking dismissal of these relationships and their prominence in his dreams creates one of the show's most poignant contradictions. The dream sequences also reveal Rick's deep-seated fear of his own vulnerability. His subconscious repeatedly processes the trauma of connection and loss, suggesting that his scientific achievements and interdimensional adventures may be elaborate distractions from more fundamental emotional wounds. In sleep, Rick can't maintain his facade of indifference, and we glimpse the wounded person behind the genius. The show's creators use these dream sequences as narrative shortcuts to Rick's true character, moments where they can bypass his defenses and show viewers who he really is beneath all the cynicism and scientific jargon. They represent some of the show's most honest character development, providing insights that would be impossible to convey through Rick's conscious actions and words. Dreams in Rick and Morty also function as foreshadowing devices, often hinting at emotional breakthroughs or breakdowns that will emerge in Rick's waking life. The issues his unconscious mind processes eventually find their way into his conscious experience, suggesting that not even Rick Sanchez can indefinitely suppress his emotional truths. His dreams reveal not just who he is, but who he's becoming, a man slowly coming to terms with his need for connection despite his philosophical objections. These dream sequences create some of the show's most memorable and affecting moments precisely because they strip away Rick's usual armor. Without his sarcasm, scientific genius, and alcoholic buffer between himself and reality, we see Rick at his most human and relatable. These glimpses behind the curtain transform him from a merely entertaining character into a profoundly complex one. Those unguarded moments in Rick's dreams pale in comparison to his reactions when facing actual death. When we witness Rick watching alternate versions of himself die, the animation slows to a painful crawl, forcing both Rick and viewers to confront the ultimate question that haunts even the most nihilistic scientist in the multiverse. Does any of this actually matter? For someone who could theoretically live forever through his technological innovations, Rick displays a puzzling preoccupation with mortality. Throughout the series, he's designed numerous systems to cheat death, with Operation Phoenix standing as his most elaborate backup plan. This contingency system automatically transfers his consciousness to a clone body when he dies, a seemingly perfect solution for immortality. Yet instead of providing comfort, these fail-safes reveal something deeper about Rick's psychological state. A man desperately afraid of an ending he claims not to believe in. The visual language of Rick and Morty speaks volumes during death scenes. When Rick faces mortality, either his own or others he secretly cares about, the animation techniques shift dramatically. Time stretches out, colors drain from the screen, and the usual fast-paced nature of the show grinds to an almost painful stillness. These aren't just stylistic choices, they're windows into Rick's emotional reality. The creators use these visual cues to signal moments when Rick's carefully constructed facade begins to crack, revealing the vulnerable human beneath the cynical scientist. Rick's psychological relationship with mortality runs deeper than simple fear of non-existence. His anxiety stems from a more profound terror, being forgotten and facing the meaninglessness of his existence. This fear manifests most clearly in episodes where he confronts alternate versions of himself dying. Despite having access to infinite lives across infinite timelines, these moments trigger existential dread as he realizes that technological immortality doesn't protect him from the emotional weight of loss, particularly the loss of his family connections and the consequences of his actions. The contradiction at the heart of Rick's character becomes most evident in these moments of mortality. While he casually creates backup clones and replacement bodies, suggesting a cavalier attitude toward death, his emotional reactions tell a completely different story. His backup systems aren't just scientific achievements. They're coping mechanisms born from mortality anxiety, elaborate constructions designed to shield him from facing the unknown and the emotional pain associated with loss. In the Ricklantis mix-up, we see a particularly powerful example of Rick's complex relationship with death. When encountering alternate versions of himself dying, the show employs stark animation contrasts that emphasize the emotional stakes. The usual vibrant color palette shifts to darker, more muted tones, creating visual dissonance that mirrors Rick's internal conflict. This juxtaposition serves a crucial narrative purpose, amplifying the tension between Rick's outward bravado and his internal turmoil when confronted with his own mortality. What's especially revealing is how Rick responds when characters he claims not to care about face death. In these moments, his indifferent facade cracks, exposing the pain he carries from his past, and his fear of forming meaningful attachments. These emotional reactions serve as poignant reminders that beneath his tough exterior exists a character wrestling with profound grief and loss. It's in these unguarded responses, often brief and quickly masked by sarcasm, that we see Rick's true nature emerge. The animation techniques deployed during death scenes purposefully slow the pace, forcing both Rick and the audience to linger in uncomfortable emotional territory. Colors shift dramatically, with warmer tones fading to cool blues and grays, symbolizing the emotional distance Rick tries to maintain even as he's forced to confront mortality. This consistent visual language creates a pattern that viewers subconsciously recognize, signaling moments when Rick can no longer hide behind his scientific genius or alcoholic buffer. Rick's creation of elaborate backup systems like Operation Phoenix reveals another layer of his character: his desperate desire to cheat death while avoiding the emotional reckoning that comes with acknowledging his fears. These technological solutions don't just extend his life. They allow him to maintain the illusion of control in a universe that repeatedly proves how little control he actually has. His reliance on these systems shows the extraordinary lengths to which he'll go to avoid confronting his deepest fears. What makes Rick's relationship with death so compelling is how it contradicts his stated nihilistic philosophy. If nothing truly matters in an infinite multiverse, why does Rick expend so much energy ensuring his continued existence? The answer lies in his unacknowledged search for meaning. His obsession with cheating death isn't about immortality for its own sake. It's about buying time to find something worth living for, something that justifies his existence across infinite timelines. The visual patterns in death scenes throughout the series often create a stark contrast between Rick's verbal nonchalance and the gravity of the situation. During his near-death experiences, the animation style shifts dramatically, highlighting the emotional stakes and Rick's underlying fears. This artistic choice underscores an essential truth about Rick. His scientific pursuits and cynical worldview serve primarily as armor against confronting the meaning of his existence and the legacy he'll leave behind. Rick's fear of being replaced or forgotten drives many of his decisions throughout the series. Despite his technological immortality, he remains haunted by the loss of family members and the implications of his actions across the multiverse. This recurring theme offers viewers a glimpse into the truly human element of a character who often seems beyond normal human concerns. It's not death itself that terrifies Rick. It's dying without having mattered, without having formed connections that outlast his physical existence. The most revealing aspect of Rick's mortality anxiety lies in the moments when it intersects with his family relationships. When family members face danger or death, Rick's reactions often betray his deeper attachments. These moments of vulnerability serve as crucial character development, showing how Rick's fear of mortality connects directly to his fear of emotional loss. Despite his claims that family members are replaceable across infinite timelines, His actions consistently demonstrate otherwise. Rick's contradictory relationship with family might be his most revealing characteristic. For a man who could travel anywhere across infinite dimensions, his persistent return to the Smith household defies his own nihilistic philosophy. The self-proclaimed loner, who insists on emotional detachment, repeatedly risks everything for the very family he claims is replaceable. This pattern suggests that Rick's greatest scientific breakthrough isn't portal technology or interdimensional travel, but the uncomfortable realization that familial bonds actually hold significance in an otherwise meaningless multiverse. Looking closely at Rick's evolution across seasons reveals a man caught between his fear of vulnerability and his innate need for connection. Early in the series, Rick maintains emotional distance while physically staying close to his family. This paradox manifests in how he'll casually mention abandoning one reality for another, while simultaneously ensuring his family's safety. By mid-series, his protective instincts become increasingly difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence or convenience. The visual storytelling supports this emotional journey through subtle but meaningful animation choices. Family-centered episodes gradually incorporate warmer lighting and more intimate framing. These technical shifts aren't accidental. They reflect Rick's thawing emotional state. Scenes between Rick and Morty particularly demonstrate this evolution, with the animation team utilizing softer colors and more nuanced expressions to convey the deepening bond between grandfather and grandson. What makes Rick's relationship with Morty especially fascinating is how it challenges his fundamental worldview. Rick insists nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, yet consistently makes illogical choices to protect one specific Morty. This contradiction becomes central to understanding Rick's character development. The animation itself reveals this emotional evolution through subtle shifts that casual viewers might miss entirely. Rick's micro-expressions during family moments, a briefly softened gaze, a momentary smile quickly hidden, reveal what his words never admit. The Rickshank Redemption episode serves as a pivotal moment in understanding Rick's complex family dynamics. His fabricated origin story involving the tragic loss of his wife and daughter isn't just narrative misdirection, it contains emotional truths about Rick's character. This backstory adds remarkable depth, highlighting the extreme measures Rick takes to protect his family despite his outwardly reckless behavior. The episode demonstrates that Rick's apparent indifference is a calculated defense mechanism rather than his true nature. As showrunner Scott Marder noted, family relationships are central to the series' narrative framework. This focus isn't incidental, but essential to understanding Rick's core motivations and the emotional stakes underlying his adventures. When viewed through this lens, Rick's seemingly random universe hopping takes on new meaning. Each adventure becomes another chapter in his struggle between emotional isolation and familial connection. The psychological concept of attachment avoidance perfectly captures Rick's behavioral patterns. His initial detachment from the Smith family functions as a defense mechanism against the pain of potential loss. Having experienced profound emotional trauma, Rick attempts to prevent further suffering by maintaining distance. Yet his eventual willingness to engage with family members reflects an internal battle between his fear of vulnerability and his fundamental desire for connection. This struggle manifests in fascinating ways throughout the series. While Rick verbally dismisses family as replaceable across infinite timelines, his actions consistently prove otherwise. When family members face danger, Rick doesn't simply find replacements in alternate dimensions. He risks everything to save the specific individuals he's grown attached to. These moments of sacrifice directly contradict his stated philosophy, revealing that Rick's nihilism is less a coherent worldview than an emotional shield. In Fear No Mort, the show explores an even deeper layer of familial connection through Morty's subconscious fears about Rick's past relationship with Diane. This episode brilliantly illustrates how intertwined their relationship has become, with Morty's insecurities directly stemming from Rick's emotional baggage. The revelation that Morty fears being replaceable in Rick's life mirrors Rick's own fear of emotional investment, creating a poignant reflection of their shared vulnerability. As the series progresses, Rick's interdimensional travel noticeably decreases, a subtle but significant indication of his growing attachment to one specific family in one specific timeline. This change in behavior suggests that despite access to infinite possibilities, Rick has found something uniquely meaningful in his current family dynamic. For a scientist who meticulously calculates every variable in the universe, this represents an almost illogical choice that defies his own rational framework. The animation reinforces this development through increasing visual warmth in family scenes. Early episodes feature colder color palettes and more distant framing during family interactions, while later seasons incorporate more intimate compositions and warmer tones. These technical choices create a visual language that communicates Rick's emotional evolution even when his words fail to acknowledge it. What's particularly revealing is how Rick's defensive mechanisms become less effective over time. His initial strategy of replacing lost family members with alternate versions gradually gives way to protecting his current family at all costs. This shift represents a profound change in Rick's relationship with attachment. From viewing family as fundamentally replaceable to recognizing the unique value of specific relationships. The contradiction between Rick's words and actions creates the central tension in his character arc. He maintains that emotional attachments are meaningless in an infinite multiverse while simultaneously forming deeper bonds with his family. This inconsistency isn't a writing flaw, but an intentional illustration of Rick's internal conflict. A man whose intellectual understanding of the universe conflicts with his emotional needs as a human being. Episodes focusing on Rick's relationship with Beth are especially illuminating. His conflicted feelings toward his daughter reveal layers of guilt, regret, and love that his casual nihilism attempts to obscure. Whether Beth is his original daughter or not becomes less relevant than the relationship they've developed. This suggests that Rick's journey isn't about finding his original family, but about learning to form meaningful connections despite the pain they might bring. Behind Rick's nihilistic shield lies a man terrified not of meaninglessness, but of meaning itself. Throughout the series, we've watched as this self-proclaimed nihilist who insists nothing matters paradoxically invests tremendous energy in avoiding genuine purpose. This contradiction reaches a fascinating climax in episodes like Thanksploitation Spectacular, where Rick's carefully constructed worldview begins to crack under the weight of his own actions. The existential themes in Rick's character become most apparent when he's forced to confront the implications of his choices. In Thanksploitation Spectacular, we see Rick's internal conflict playing out as he navigates the consequences of his schemes while maintaining his facade of detachment. The episode serves as a critical turning point that illuminates the war raging within him, between the comfort of believing nothing matters and the terrifying possibility that some things might actually have meaning. What makes Rick's character so compelling is how his philosophical crisis manifests in his behavior. His intelligence and capabilities are constantly juxtaposed against the absurdity of existence, creating scenarios where he must question the fundamental nature of his reality. These moments don't just challenge Rick intellectually, they strike at the core of his emotional defenses. When Rick dismisses the universe as meaningless, he's not merely stating a philosophical position. He's actively trying to convince himself this is true. The brilliance of the show's writing emerges in how Rick's interactions with others force him to confront these existential questions. His relationship with Morty in particular creates situations where his nihilistic armor shows its first cracks. We see this especially in later seasons where Rick's genuine connections with his grandson expose vulnerabilities he's desperately tried to conceal. These moments reveal that Rick's fear isn't that life lacks meaning, but rather that acknowledging meaning would require him to face his past traumas and take responsibility for his actions. The series creators have intentionally crafted episodes exploring Rick's fears and motivations, making his existential crisis a central theme. This is particularly evident in scenes where Rick's relationships force him to confront his own vulnerabilities. There's a pattern to these confrontations. Rick typically responds with deflection, sarcasm, or escapism, but the emotional impact lingers, accumulating across episodes and seasons to create a portrait of a man at war with himself. The visual storytelling of the series enhances this character development in fascinating ways. As Rick grapples with deeper philosophical questions, the animation becomes more intricate and layered. The visual style evolves from the relatively straightforward presentation of early seasons to increasingly complex patterns that mirror Rick's evolving worldview. This progression isn't just aesthetic, it's a deliberate artistic choice that reflects Rick's internal journey from rigid nihilism towards something more nuanced. One of the most revealing aspects of Rick's character emerges when he confronts the consequences of his nihilism. In the season finale, Rick's realization that his quest for revenge against Rick Prime leaves him feeling empty underscores the existential dread that defines him. This moment strips away his scientific achievements and clever escapes to reveal a fundamental truth. Rick's pursuit of meaning continues, despite his insistence that meaning doesn't exist. Rick's past traumas, especially the loss of his family, are crucial in understanding his search for meaning. The series reveals that his nihilistic outlook serves as a protective mechanism against the pain of loss. He adopts the position that nothing matters as a shield against suffering. But this defense mechanism comes at a tremendous cost. It prevents him from fully experiencing joy, connection, and purpose, the very things that might heal his emotional wounds. The philosophical concepts woven into Rick's character development extend beyond simple nihilism. The show explores existentialism through Rick's responsibility for creating his own meaning in an apparently meaningless universe. It examines absurdism in how Rick confronts the fundamental disconnect between his search for meaning and the universe's inability to provide it. These philosophical frameworks aren't just intellectual exercises, they're the battlefield where Rick's internal war plays out. Despite his cynicism, Rick experiences moments of genuine wonder and joy that serve as critical turning points in his character arc. These instances, though brief, highlight the potential for growth and connection, suggesting that even in a seemingly meaningless universe, there are experiences worth cherishing. The contrast between Rick's stated philosophy and these moments of authentic emotion creates the tension that drives his character development. The evolution of Rick's worldview becomes particularly evident in episodes dealing with his past. As the series progresses, we learn that his journey isn't just about cosmic adventures, but about reconciling with his emotional scars. His nihilism isn't innate. It's a response to trauma, a coping mechanism that helped him survive but now prevents him from healing. Recognition of this pattern is the first step in Rick's gradual movement toward a more complex philosophical position. What makes this character journey so compelling is that Rick never completely abandons his nihilistic tendencies. Instead, we see him developing a more nuanced relationship with meaning. He begins to recognize that while the universe may be inherently meaningless, the connections we form and the choices we make can still have significance. This doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment, but through small, cumulative shifts in how Rick responds to challenges and relationships. The series portrays this philosophical evolution through Rick's changing relationship with control. Early on, his need to be the smartest person in every room reflected his desperate attempt to impose order on a chaotic universe. As his character develops, we see him gradually accepting uncertainty and vulnerability. This acceptance doesn't come easily. It emerges through painful confrontations with his own limitations and the recognition that some forms of meaning exist beyond his control. Rick's search for purpose ultimately reveals the most human aspect of his character. Beyond his genius, beyond his cynicism, beyond his extraordinary capabilities, Rick is driven by the same fundamental questions that define the human experience. Why am I here? What matters? How do I connect with others? The series doesn't provide easy answers to these questions, but it suggests that Rick's journey toward addressing them represents his true adventure. What if the most honest character in Rick and Morty isn't a character at all, but the soundtrack itself? While Rick maintains his emotional walls through sarcasm and scientific jargon, the music of the series speaks volumes about what's really happening beneath his carefully constructed facade. The soundtrack becomes a window into his soul that his dialogue actively tries to conceal, an emotional truth-teller that bypasses all of Rick's defense mechanisms. From the very beginning, the creators of Rick and Morty understood that music would play a crucial role in conveying the emotional depth that the characters themselves often refuse to acknowledge. The contrast between upbeat adventure music during Rick's cosmic escapades and the haunting emotional scores during his vulnerable moments creates a narrative dissonance that perfectly captures his internal conflict. This musical counterpoint allows viewers to experience the disconnect between what Rick says and what he actually feels. Perhaps the most powerful example of this musical honesty comes after Unity leaves Rick in autoerotic assimilation. As Rick returns home alone, the song "Do You Feel It?" by Chaos begins to play. The devastating melody contradicts Rick's earlier casual dismissal of their relationship, revealing the shattered heart beneath the scientific genius. While Rick remains silent, the music speaks for him, a musical confession his ego would never allow. This moment demonstrates how the soundtrack functions as an emotional translator, converting Rick's silence into profound feeling. Similarly, the recurring theme for The Damaged Coda has become synonymous with evil Morty, creating an instant emotional response from viewers whenever it plays. This haunting melody doesn't just accompany the character, it defines him, adding layers of emotional weight to his narrative arc and highlighting the complexities of his relationship with Rick. The music accomplishes what dialogue alone cannot, building a bridge between the viewer and the emotional subtext of each scene. The show's use of diegetic music that exists within the world of the characters, offers another layer of insight into Rick's personality. The songs that play while Rick works in his garage or cruises through space aren't random choices, but carefully selected windows into his emotional state. These musical selections reveal aspects of Rick's character that he would never willingly express through words, providing viewers with a deeper understanding of who he really is beneath the cynical exterior. Sound design plays an equally important role during Rick's most introspective moments. The ambient noise and musical choices fade in and out, mirroring Rick's mental state as he processes difficult emotions. During scenes where Rick confronts his own limitations or vulnerabilities, the background sounds often become more atmospheric and ethereal, creating a sense of emotional suspension that enhances the viewer's connection to his internal struggle. These sonic landscapes don't just accompany the visuals, they transform them, adding emotional texture to even the most seemingly straightforward scenes. Throughout the series, specific musical motifs recur during pivotal emotional moments in Rick's character arc. These recurring themes help create a cohesive emotional landscape that resonates with viewers on a subconscious level. When we hear familiar musical cues, we're instantly transported back to previous moments of significance, connecting different episodes through their emotional through lines rather than just their narrative ones. This musical continuity makes Rick's emotional journey feel more coherent, even when his actions seem contradictory or erratic. What makes the show's soundtrack particularly effective is how often it contradicts Rick's verbal statements. While Rick might insist that nothing matters and that emotional attachments are pointless, the music tells a completely different story. Behind every nihilistic rant and scientific explanation lies a soundtrack that betrays Rick's true emotional state, exposing vulnerabilities he desperately tries to hide and highlighting connections he pretends not to value. This contradiction creates a rich viewing experience, allowing audiences to understand Rick on multiple levels simultaneously. The creator's comments about the music choices reveal just how intentional this approach is. The soundtrack isn't just background noise or emotional manipulation. It's a crucial element of the storytelling, designed to deepen our understanding of the characters and themes. Each musical choice is made with purpose, carefully selected to enhance our emotional connection to the story and reveal aspects of Rick's character that might otherwise remain hidden. The pacing of the music also contributes to the show's unique ability to function as ambient content. The way musical themes build and resolve creates a rhythmic quality that makes Rick and Morty perfect for winding down at the end of the day. Even during intense or action-packed scenes, the soundtrack maintains a certain flowing quality that allows viewers to engage with the narrative in a relaxed, almost meditative state. This musical pacing transforms what could be an overwhelming sci-fi adventure into a soothing experience that helps ease viewers towards sleep. When we examine Rick's emotional journey through the lens of the soundtrack, we begin to see a more complete picture of his character development. From the frantic, chaotic themes of early episodes to the more nuanced and emotionally complex arrangements of later seasons, the music tracks Rick's gradual evolution from closed-off nihilist to someone capable of acknowledging deeper connections. This sonic evolution happens so subtly that we might not consciously notice it, but it profoundly shapes our perception of Rick's character arc. The sound design during portal transitions deserves special attention as well. The distinctive whoosh and hum of Rick's portal gun is accompanied by ethereal, almost dreamlike music that creates a sense of both wonder and disconnection. This auditory experience mirrors Rick's emotional state during these transitions, simultaneously escaping from difficult emotions while seeking something meaningful in the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. The portal sound has become so iconic that it instantly evokes the emotional complexity of Rick's character with just a few notes. Beyond individual scenes, the overall musical landscape of Rick and Morty creates a consistent emotional environment that helps viewers process the show's more challenging philosophical concepts. The combination of synthesizer-heavy sci-fi themes, emotionally raw acoustic moments, and carefully chosen licensed tracks creates a sonic world that feels both alien and deeply human, much like Rick himself. This musical foundation allows the show to explore profound questions about meaning and connection while remaining accessible and engaging. In a multiverse where every possible reality exists side by side, what does it really mean when one specific version of a character chooses to grow? The multiverse presented Rick with an impossible paradox. When you can access infinite versions of yourself, what meaning does personal growth even have? Yet despite having the ultimate escape hatch from consequences, our Rick makes choices that increasingly separate him from his multiversal counterparts, suggesting that even in infinite possibility, some paths matter more than others. Rick C-137 stands apart from the countless other Ricks scattered throughout the multiverse in profound ways. While many Ricks are portrayed as emotionally detached and completely self-serving, our Rick embarks on a journey that reveals a deeper quest for meaning and connection that makes him unique. We see this contrast most clearly when Rick interacts with the Council of Ricks, where his disdain for their conformity highlights his own independent path. These other Ricks serve as mirrors reflecting what C-137 could have become had he made different choices, making his eventual growth all the more significant. The visual storytelling in Rick and Morty subtly reinforces this character evolution through deliberate design choices that many viewers might miss on first watch. Pay attention to Rick's posture throughout the series. In early episodes, his hunched shoulders and perpetual scowl physically manifest his emotional barriers. As the series progresses, we notice subtle changes. Moments where he stands taller when protecting his family, fleeting expressions of vulnerability when he thinks no one is watching, and even slight changes in how he carries himself when faced with emotional situations. These visual cues aren't accidental. The animation team deliberately uses these design elements to illustrate Rick's internal struggles, shifting animation styles during pivotal moments of character development. In Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular, we can observe how Rick's body language during interactions with Morty reveals the ongoing battle between maintaining his indifferent facade and acknowledging the emotional turmoil driving his actions. His eyes, in particular, often betray his true feelings through micro-expressions that contradict his sarcastic remarks. What makes Rick's evolution particularly fascinating is how differently he grows in his relationships with each family member. With Beth, we witness a gradual shift from avoidance to occasional moments of genuine connection, as Rick slowly confronts his guilt over abandoning her. His relationship with Morty transforms from viewing him as a disposable shield to recognizing him as an essential emotional anchor. Even with Jerry, whom Rick overtly despises, we see moments where Rick makes choices that acknowledge Jerry's place in the family structure, however grudgingly. Summer's relationship with Rick evolves perhaps most dramatically, from dismissive grandfather to something approaching mutual respect. Their dynamic shifts as Rick begins to recognize Summer's capabilities and resilience, qualities that mirror his own. These distinct relationship trajectories show that Rick isn't simply becoming nicer in a generic sense. He's developing specific emotional responses to individual family members, indicating a more nuanced emotional growth. The creator comments about Rick's journey reveal that this evolution was intentional from the beginning. They've noted that Rick's story isn't just about showcasing his intelligence and scientific prowess, but exploring how his emotional connections, particularly with Morty, become increasingly significant as the series progresses. This deliberate character development challenges the nihilistic philosophy Rick espouses in early episodes, suggesting that his journey represents a philosophical evolution as much as an emotional one. Rick's growing self-awareness becomes increasingly evident in later seasons, marked by his willingness to acknowledge emotions that he previously suppressed or denied. This represents a significant departure from his earlier nihilistic tendencies, suggesting potential for redemption and growth that seemed impossible in earlier episodes. We see moments where Rick actually pauses before deflecting with humor or reaching for his flask, small hesitations that indicate he's beginning to process emotions rather than immediately escaping them. This growing emotional awareness links directly to Rick's philosophical evolution. His initial stance that nothing matters gradually transforms into a more complex worldview that acknowledges the possibility of meaning even in a chaotic multiverse. Rick's journey can be viewed through the lens of personal growth and identity, where his ability to confront fears and vulnerabilities signals a departure from earlier self-destructive patterns. As he faces his past traumas and present attachments, Rick begins to inhabit a philosophical middle ground, acknowledging the vast meaninglessness of the universe while still making choices that reflect personal values. What makes this evolution remarkable is that it happens despite Rick's access to infinite versions of himself. In a multiverse where Rick could simply portal to a reality where he never experienced emotional growth or vulnerability, he instead chooses, however reluctantly, to stay on a path of development. This suggests that even in a reality of infinite possibilities, some journeys have intrinsic value that transcends the temptation to escape into easier alternatives. The contrast between Rick C-137 and other Ricks throughout the multiverse emphasizes his unique character arc. While many Ricks remain self-serving and emotionally detached, content to exploit infinite realities for their own benefit, our Rick's journey reveals a deeper quest for meaning and connection. This doesn't make him necessarily better than other Ricks in a moral sense, but it does make him more complex and ultimately more human. We can observe this contrast most clearly in episodes featuring multiple Ricks. The evil Ricks, the conformist council Ricks, and the countless disposable background Ricks all represent paths not taken by our Rick. Versions of himself that embraced different aspects of the Rick personality without the growth that defines C-137. By showing us these alternatives, the series emphasizes that Rick's development isn't inevitable or predetermined. It's the result of specific choices made even when easier options were available. Rick's relationships with family members become the primary catalyst for this growth, showing how these connections shape his identity in ways that distinguish him from other Ricks. While many Ricks abandon their families or treat them as interchangeable across infinite realities, our Rick's gradual acceptance of emotional vulnerability marks him as unique. His growing awareness that these specific relationships matter, even in an infinite multiverse where alternates exist, represents perhaps his most profound philosophical evolution. After following Rick through countless dimensions and mind-bending adventures, we can see his character arc isn't just about scientific discoveries, but emotional ones. What began as a journey with a seemingly uncaring scientist gradually reveals something much deeper. The realization that connections matter, even in an infinite multiverse where everything seems replaceable. Rick's evolution suggests that his nihilistic exterior was always protecting something vulnerable underneath. As your eyes grow heavy and these cosmic adventures lull you to sleep, it's worth reflecting on how Rick's journey mirrors our own struggles in finding meaning. The show brilliantly illustrates that while life may seem chaotic and potentially meaningless at cosmic scale, the relationships we form become our anchors. Rick's most profound growth isn't in his scientific achievements, but in those quiet moments where he acknowledges the importance of family bonds, despite the pain that caring inevitably brings. The true brilliance of Rick and Morty lies in this contradiction, that in a universe where nothing technically matters, choosing to care anyway becomes the ultimate act of rebellion. As you drift off, perhaps that's the most soothing realization of all.